Welcome everyone to OK Let's Talk. I'm your host Rob, and today we're diving into the latest global reports from all around the world. And we aren't just watching the news, we're breaking down the history and the why behind the headlines to give you a deeper educational perspective. With that said, let's get to the analysis. Educational commentary and analysis falls under Fair Use, Section 107. Enjoy the stream.
Police had managed to hold these protesters at this intersection. There is a bus parked nearby ready to take people away if they're arrested, and officers have their handcuffs ready. They are prepared.
There are conflicting reports already coming out of DC and Tehran about what's open, what isn't. I'm hearing that Trump said everything's open, and then I'm hearing that Trump said no, the blockade is still on from the U.S. military. And Tehran says it's open, but they still have to pay a toll. So we'll see.
Iran says the Strait of Hormuz is completely open to commercial ships for the remainder of the ceasefire.
Okay.
President Trump says the U.S. naval blockade on Iranian ports will remain in effect until a deal is finalized with Iran.
So we got nowhere with this.
Ceasefire in Lebanon, thousands displaced by Israeli attacks return home as a 10-day truce begins.
Insane.
That's as President Trump says the U.S. prohibits Israel from bombing Lebanon any longer. Plus, markets react, oil prices plummet as the Strait of Hormuz fully reopens, according to Iran. We'll have more on the reaction from financial markets.
Well, the futures price has fallen. The actual physical price is very, very high, about $140 a barrel for Brent.
Iran
I just looked it up.
Fully reopened the Strait of Hormuz to commercial vessels. The decision tied to a new 10-day ceasefire in Lebanon, which Tehran wanted as part of its truce with the United States. When posting on X, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said ships crossing the strait will take a route designated by Iranian maritime authorities. Well, U.S. President Donald Trump has welcomed the news, but says a U.S. naval blockade on Iran, that will remain in full force while negotiations continue. A 2-week ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran is due to end on Wednesday. Trump says a deal to end the war is mostly complete. Well, this live map gives you the picture right now at the Strait of Hormuz. As you can see, red dots there and red arrows. They are oil tankers. Those in green, commercial vessels. Around a fifth of global oil supplies are normally transported through the waterway. It's been largely closed since the start of the Iran conflict nearly 7 weeks ago. That's left hundreds of vessels stranded. Al Jazeera's Ali Hashim is standing by in Tehran. But first, let's go to our chief U.S. correspondent, Alan Fisher. He joins us from the White House. So, Alan, every time we talk, there are more lines to decipher here, so bear with me. The latest lines that the U.S. President Donald Trump is saying Iran has agreed to suspend its nuclear program indefinitely, and is talking about going to collect dust at a leisurely pace. So,
do we have confirmation of this from the Iranians?
First of all, when he says a nuclear program, are you talking about all nuclear activities or enrichment? What can we take away from that?
Well, we know that his bottom line was that Iran will never have a nuclear weapon, and we know that enrichment beyond a certain point it turns it into weapons grade. So we don't know whether this is no, nay, never, or just you can't take it beyond 3%, which is normally the amount which is used for domestic power. When Donald Trump says other countries don't have domestic power nuclear programs with enriched uranium, they do. There's a number of countries, including Brazil. The fact that he's saying he wanted no nuclear weapons, this would seem to suggest that Donald Trump has got what he wants. Now, the other thing to remember, of course, is that Iran has always said it has never pursued a nuclear weapon. It
do
was
we have
never
any confirmation
goal.
of any of this from the Iranians?
To a fatwa by the late Ayatollah that they would never develop a nuclear weapon. And in fact, Tulsi Gabbard, who's the Director of National Intelligence, told a congressional hearing in March last year that it was the US intelligence assessment that Iran was not pursuing a nuclear weapon. So it looks as if the main thing that was the sticking point during conversations with the Iranians in Islamabad has been overcome as far as Donald Trump is concerned. As for the nuclear dust, that refers to the enriched uranium. Now, many people believe it is buried deep in the Iranian nuclear sites that were bombed by the Americans during Operation Midnight Hammer last summer. There was talk about sending troops in. The fact that he says they will now leisurely go and get that is interesting. So that suggests that they're going to be effectively invited in by the Iranians to those nuclear sites to first of all dig out what was attacked and bombed by the US. Obliterated, you remember, is the word that was used by Donald Trump, meaning completely destroyed. And then they will recover whatever uranium is there, and then the United States will take it. Iran will not receive any money from that at all. There's also another thing he said, is that no money will change hands. That's interesting because one of Donald Trump's big campaigning issues was that Barack Obama handed over $1.7 billion to the Iranians in pallets of money. We saw the pictures of that. That was settlement for a pre-1979 issue between the United States and the Iranians, an arms sale that was never carried out. It was around $400,000 in principle. The rest was made up of interest. Donald Trump made a big deal about this. We will never give Iran that level of money. He believes that that helped Iran finance support in Hezbollah, Hamas, and also the Houthis.
Because he's
so
stupid.
He was never keen to see that the Iranians would get any sort of money from the United States. But what may be agreed is unfreezing assets around the rest of the world, maybe not in the United States, where there's about $20 billion, but also give the Iranians access to the monetary system, which was the reason Obama had to transfer pallets of money, because there was no way of transferring money into Iran. So it feels that over the last couple of hours that we've been getting the negotiations almost in real time, that as each thing is being agreed, someone is passing on to the president, and the president, rather than making a big announcement, is making it individually, and it appears there's momentum towards a peace deal. But as anyone who's run a marathon will tell you, the last kilometre is always the hardest.
If you're relying on Trump telling the truth as momentum for a peace deal, you're insane.
For us, but we need to take
Or really
now to
stupid.
Ali Hashim, and he's live for us in the Iranian capital. So, Ali, are we hearing any confirmation of all these new lines dropping from the US president? Iran has agreed to suspend its nuclear program indefinitely, that the US will go in at a leisurely pace to recover uranium.
Trump, given the Iranian red lines, and given at least last conversations between us and Iranian officials with respect to what's the prospect of the deal with the United States. For now, what the Iranians were saying, because we don't have anyone right now saying what we heard from them before, is that there is an agreement on a framework, and this framework has several issues to be negotiated upon.
Framework of a concept of a deal.
The sunset, whether there is a 20 years, 15 years, 10 years, 5 years hold of enrichment. Also, the fate of the highly enriched uranium. The Iranians are saying they have an idea to dilute them under the supervision of the IAEA, the nuclear watchdog, here in Iran, and use them later in their own in their own nuclear plants here in Tehran. So what's on the table isn't a deal, isn't a comprehensive deal the way President Trump is talking now. At the end, President
Trump's just trying to manipulate the markets.
A Republican, he's a president of the United States, and he's capable of giving the updates that are being reached during the election. Now, the main issue here is that what is the reality and what are the red lines? Because if Iran is giving up its nuclear program this way, then it's over. Then there's no need for further negotiations. There's no need for a framework. There is no need for.
There's no need for a blockade.
Announce a deal.
And yet Trump is keeping it in place.
Iran decided to give up its nuclear program for so and so and so and so. But this is too much superficial when it comes to the reality on the ground, or else this is a different Iran that we do not know.
All right. Stay with us once again, Ali Hashim in Tehran. I'm going to take it back to Washington, D.C. and Alan Fisher, because we've got more to decipher, Alan. The U.S. president also talked about the U.S. Navy blockade staying in place until the transaction, he says, is 100% complete. What does that mean, the transaction is 100%? Does it mean a final deal is signed?
Well, it would be parsing the president, but I suspect that's exactly what it means. Donald Trump believes that the
Trump has no idea what he
blockade
means.
has been a huge success.
How are we
Remember,
supposed
he
to know?
announced it last weekend. They were going to blockade the Strait of Hormuz. Everyone was concerned that that meant no ships would go through there at all. Then we heard from CENTCOM, the US military operation that is controlling the war. They said, look, this is just going to be about Iranian ports. They say it's been a huge success. They've turned away a number of ships. They've also returned a number of ships back to Iranian ports, told them they would not be allowed to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. This is all important because effectively what it does is choke Iran off from world markets for their energy produce. They're not getting hard currency in, they're not even getting cryptocurrency in. They can't sell anything, so therefore they are struggling financially to continue doing what governments do, including in this case,
If there's one thing the
financing and
Iranians know how to
rebuilding
do, it's struggle.
whatever defenses
They
that
can
have
outlast Trump.
in this operation. And so Donald Trump sees this as a very important part of that pressure campaign to get Iran to the negotiating table to effectively sign up for what the United States wants to do. As I say, what we've seen is effectively over the last 24 hours or so, the sequencing of some sort of peace deal which suggests there is momentum to all of this. First of all, we had the ceasefire in Lebanon. Donald Trump says they're not linked, but that was a key demand of Iran that they wanted to see that happen. Then there was the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. Then there was the idea of recovering some of the nuclear dust, the enriched uranium. And now Donald Trump suggesting that the nuclear program will be halted with no deadline, exactly what the United States was after. So here we are, almost 1 week on from when the talks started in Islamabad. The American side has certainly seemed to suggest that they're getting all that they asked for. You'll remember when J.D. Vance, the Vice President, walked out, he said they'd agreed on a number of things, but the key thing that they couldn't get was a guarantee that Iran would not pursue nuclear weapons. From what Donald Trump
They never said they wanted to
suggesting
pursue nuclear
from his,
weapons.
Truth Social posts is that has been agreed. So that would suggest that when Donald Trump talks about a deal being done, we can be very close. And of course, you'll remember that 24 hours ago, as he was about to leave the White House for his trip to the western part of the United States, he said there'd be no need to extend the ceasefire, which has only got 4 days to go, because he believed that a deal was very close. So that would suggest we're working on a very, very short timescale now.
Let's go back to Ali Hashim once again in the Iranian capital. So, Ali, are we hearing any reaction, Iranian reaction, to the pledge by the US that it's going to keep this naval blockade in place?
Well, what we heard is from an Iranian source who spoke to Fast News Agency, and he said that as far as the blockade continues, then this is a violation to the ceasefire. And they've kind of asked
This is going to fall apart immediately.
vessels and tankers to pass through certain passages that they've drawn. Also, the Iranians are saying that military vessels are not allowed, ships are not allowed to pass through the strait. So this is what we're hearing. But what I know right now is that there's the spokesman for the Iranian foreign ministry is supposed to give an interview in the coming minutes to the national television to explain many points in this regard. I think then we'll have many answers coming from Mr. Ismail Waqai.
All right, we'll leave it there. So thanks to Al Jazeera's Ali Hashim in Tehran and our chief US
Well, this is all
correspondent,
market
Alan
manipulation
Fisher
bullshit from
at the
Trump.
White House.
That's what it looks like right now.
Now, while Iran says the Strait of Hormuz
Insane.
is now fully opened, the foreign minister says ships must use the coordinated route already announced by the country's ports and maritime organization.
Pay the
Just
toll.
last week, the Revolutionary Guard said this was the route vessels needed to take in coordination with its navy. This is a more northerly route closer to Iran's coast. And those shipped routes pass either side of Larak Island. That's the heavily guarded island, reportedly being used by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps to monitor ship traffic. Now, the shipping company Maersk has just reacted to Iran's announcement about easing restrictions in the Strait of Hormuz. In a statement, the company says any decision to transit the strait will be based on risk assessment, and Maersk adding that the recommendation so far has been to avoid transiting the strait, despite that announcement.
How are those insurance rates doing?
Joining me in the studio is Alexandru Hudășteanu. He's a military analyst with expertise in maritime security. Good to have you with us. So listening to that statement by Maersk, it sounds like shipping companies, at least some of them, are saying, let's hold off and wait and see. Am I reading it right?
Yes, and it's a fairly normal attitude. As I said, shipping companies and ships generally, merchant shipping, doesn't really look at social media posting for taking their decisions. They do have a very substantive risk calculus behind that they go through. There's a process for that. Once they have more reinforcement and more reassuring conditions, they will pass. One of them would be, for example, to have some form of third-party military presence there that will allow the ships to see that, yes, the ships can pass, the ships are left alone. Also, messaging through broadcasting systems for the maritime world from Iran and from US side will probably increase that confidence that the announcement is real and they can act upon, because we have to understand that it takes a specific amount of time for the ships to pass through the actual strait. And any type of ceasefire breakage or any type of this, let's say, escalation in the position between the two states will end up having a ship caught in the middle of, let's say, a diplomatic or military debate between the two belligerent parties.
Now, given what the first point that you mentioned, a military escort, I mean, is that likely to happen? How realistic is that? We've seen countries very reluctant to go into that kind of operation, because all it takes realistically from the Iranian side is even a threat that it might target a commercial ship. Would that not be enough to make commercial ships say, we're not getting involved in this till you guys sort this out?
The trust is broken. The trust in what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz is broken for all parties, including for the merchant
So it
shipping.
really means there needs to be some kind of deal.
So what it needs to be, sometimes needs to pass at a minimum 24 to 48 hours, in which the constant messaging for both sides will be consistent with what they said now. So if for the next 24 hours, 48 hours, both parties, Iran and US, are continuing issuing these messages, that will increase some form of confidence. Then you would have those ships trying to pass as soon as possible. And if that happens, that will just continuously increase confidence that, yes, this is a real announcement, this is a real situation, this is a new change, this is a new status quo. But we need to read into the message. The message clearly states the ships need to pass through the recommended routes that the Port and Maritime Authority of Iran is recommending. Those routes are passing through Larak Island, and they need to be in contact with Iranian authorities. So the trust is broken. That trust needs to be built.
On that point, it's clear, and we saw it on the map, that the coordinated route that the Iranians are saying commercial vessels can now use, that brings it very close, if not in Iranian territorial waters, right?
Yes.
That's obviously not by chance. This is designed to show that Iran still maintains control.
I think it's just to show that this is a conditional opening of the strait for some specific amount of time.
Everything is conditional
to the ceasefire agreement.
Well, that's 4 days, right?
It's 4 days, but it might be signaling that Iran is looking at an extension of that ceasefire, and it's now putting pressure on US to actually have a discussion about a continuation of ceasefire in case the deal is not reached in 4 days. In any case, it's irrelevant for shipping, because we're talking transit passage or innocent passage, depending on which bound of legislation we're looking at in terms of international law for the law of the sea. Iran is not a signatory on, is a signatory of a clause but hasn't ratified the convention. In that sense, they can agree not to use the transit passage, but they are still bound by customary law by innocent passage. So for the shipping world, it's irrelevant because it's an international strait. That means passage should not be impeded, regardless if it's in the territorial waters or not, because the initial traffic separation scheme was actually in the Omani territorial water, and that was never a problem. So the actual passage through those routes is more of show of Iran is in control of this passage, and it's a conditional, leveraged opening of the strait under this specific condition, which puts some pressure back on the U.S. side. At the same time, U.S. is countering that pressure with saying we are going to keep the blockade. U.S. is keeping their blockades. They haven't been mentioned, and that would be probably a good indication if the deal, if this announcement is actually valid. If the next ships that pass will come with some answers afterwards saying that they haven't been taxed, or they haven't had to pay this toll, that will increase the confidence that this is a real opportunity for shipping to resume through the strait, and that will increase confidence in the actual negotiation and in the actual situation overall.
Okay, thank you so much, Alexandru Hudishtanu, military diplomatic analyst and maritime security expert. Thanks for coming into the studio here in Doha. Well, Brent crude prices are down sharply after Iran's announced it was easing restrictions at the Strait of Hormuz. Oil is still up significantly since the war began, but it's been dropping since the ceasefire was announced last week. The markets are open in the U.S. with major indices all posting gains at the bell.
Pump and dump. Pump and dump.
Up almost 1%, with the Dow Jones gaining 0.43 and the S&P 0.47. U.S. indices have been rebounding over the past week, with the S&P hitting all-time highs. And Patty Culhane joins us now live from Washington, D.C. And Patty, the latest lines, I guess, to increase the optimism, Donald Trump saying that a deal to end the war is mostly complete. How much relief might that give in the markets?
Well, so far today, it seems that investors are quite pleased with the news. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is up 1,062, reaching record levels. Right now, the Dow Jones is at 49,642. It peaked past 50,000 in early February. That was a record. So you can see that investors are, in fact, very excited. What matters, though, probably more to the global economy, to the local economy, is the price of gas. Just to give you a sense of where it was before the war started, it was Brent crude was about $72 a barrel. Then it spiked. We saw it go almost as close as $110 a barrel. Prices then across the country and across the world at the pump really started to climb. So right now we're seeing, and I just checked, it's around $88 a barrel. So
yeah,
still
that's just the futures price. That doesn't mean anything. The physical price is $1.40, $140 a barrel.
What does this actually
mean?
Right now. You're not going to see prices at the pump go down if, in fact, this is a deal and the Strait of Hormuz is open, because the International Monetary Fund, they just put out a report this week that said the damage is pretty much done. There's going to be continued shock to the system. It's going to take a very long time for all of the supplies to get going, for prices to come down, for the price of a barrel to come down, and then it takes an even longer time to show up at gas pumps around the world. And this is very much the issue that Americans are focused on. Just to give you a sense, diesel, which is always more expensive than the gas that most people use, that's what powers the economy, the trucks that ship everything everywhere. In D.C., I saw it over $6 a gallon, and I know it's hard for people to translate the
over
liters to
$6 here
gallons,
too.
but that's pretty much unheard of. And so what we're seeing because of that is every person who's selling goods is putting on a fuel surcharge. So it's not just it's more expensive to get to and from work, it's more expensive to buy pretty much anything right now.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thanks so much to Patty Culhane joining us from Washington, D.C. In Lebanon, thousands of people displaced by the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah have been heading south after a U.S.-brokered ceasefire took effect late on Thursday. Many are returning to find their homes destroyed. Zaina Khuda reports from Nabatea in southern Lebanon.
Because Bibi likes war crimes.
Destruction in the south. Huwaida returned to find her home in ruins, like many other Lebanese people. They've returned after the U.S. brokered a temporary 10-day truce with Israel. Nabateeh was among the areas Israeli forces repeatedly targeted with strikes during 46 days of conflict. Some didn't have time to escape.
No one really knows if this ceasefire will hold. You just can't be sure, because you can't trust Israel and the United States.
Their return, even with the uncertainty about what comes next, is being framed as a victory. Many of the more than 1.2 million people displaced across Lebanon support Hezbollah. Families were holding pictures of their sons, husbands, brothers who fought the Israeli military as they invaded southern Lebanon. The Israeli military hasn't withdrawn, and it has advised residents not to return to villages close to the border. This is a temporary truce dependent on progress in negotiations between Lebanon and Israel, dependent on the Lebanese government's ability to assert its sovereignty, conditions that will not be easy to achieve. Hezbollah is still active in southern Lebanon, and it is refusing to cooperate with the government and disarm. Any move against the group could worsen internal tensions. Israel failed in its objective to destroy Hezbollah. It is tied to Lebanon's Shia Muslim community, people who have little faith in a state that is now negotiating with an enemy. Israel has killed more than 2,000 people, including women and children. It even targeted health centers and medical workers. Nearly 100 of them were killed in deliberate attacks.
We have been targeted by airstrikes, sometimes double-tap strikes. They hit us while helping those targeted. We work under stress, knowing we can be killed anytime, but we never stopped.
There's anger for people here in the south.
Right, Belinda?
Negotiations can't
Welcome.
lead to normalization or peace. They want Israel to abandon its occupation of Lebanese land.
It's plenty of years worth of work, worth of hard work, worth of money, worth of sweat, just gone in a blink of an eye. Because this is Israel. That's how it is.
The truce allows Israel to act against what it says is a security threat without it constituting a violation, similar to the 2024 ceasefire. Hezbollah says this time it will respond. But here, talk of diplomacy, talk of peace is not what is on people's minds. They are trying to absorb their tragedy. Zena Khudr, Al Jazeera, Nabateeh, southern Lebanon.
Well, Israel has been occupying swaths of territory in southern Lebanon. In early March, the Israeli army issued forced evacuation orders to people in much of southern Lebanon. And that came after Hezbollah sent rockets into northern Israel in retaliation for the assassination of
Trump
Iran's
doesn't care
Supreme
about
leader,
Christians.
Ali Khamenei.
Neither does Bibi.
The blue highlighted areas on the map are now under Israeli occupation following the launch of its ground invasion. Satellite images show towns and villages in these areas being leveled by Israeli demolitions. More than 1 million people have been displaced throughout Lebanon. Al Jazeera's Obeid Hito has been speaking to some of those returning to the south whose lives have been upended by weeks of Israeli attacks.
It's the first day of the ceasefire here in Lebanon, and there is a massive reverse migration going on. Tens and thousands of people who were displaced from their homes in southern Lebanon
Welcome,
are now
Carl.
returning.
Yeah, that's all he knows how to do is lie.
What is not known yet if they are going to find their homes intact or just destruction left behind by 6 weeks of Israeli attacks on southern Lebanon. The military has been working throughout the night and most of the morning today to fix the Qasimiya bridge. It is now only working in one direction, from the north to the south, allowing tens of thousands of people to come back to their homes. For people returning to their homes in southern Lebanon, these are the scenes that they're going to find here in the city of Tyre.
This is what Israel's good at, war crimes.
Destroyed last night in
Unbelievable.
the moments just before the ceasefire went into effect. 3 missiles hit this residential neighborhood, destroying several buildings, one of them at least 9 floors high. And now rescue teams are actually digging through the rubble to try and find survivors. And there are still children missing underneath the rubble of these buildings.
Like what happened, President Trump told them they have to cease fire. They did these massacres every single time, every war, and they start bombing buildings everywhere. It's crazy. That's not the world we need to live in.
One of the hallmarks of Israel's tactics in Lebanon has been the targeting of critical infrastructure, not only bridges, but hospitals as well. This is one of them. Tibnin Hospital was recently attacked in the days leading up to the ceasefire. A triple tap strike targeted medical workers and paramedics, killing a total of 4 people, all of them medical workers here in southern Lebanon. And this is something that Israel has been doing systematically throughout the country. There's also this business here, a small business. We saw the young lady going through her products. She sells children's clothes, and she's been here now for about 20 minutes going through what's left of her shop. And you can see how this young lady is overwhelmed with emotion going through what she's built over time with a lot of effort and money.
All of my hard work is gone. Everything disappeared in 5 minutes. When we fled from here, we brought all of our products and put it in the store. Now I'm seeing the products I had in storage out in the street.
It's going to take a lot longer than the 10 days of the ceasefire for people to realize how big the destruction is. But people here say they are going to rebuild regardless. Obaidahito, Al Jazeera, Southern Lebanon.
Nida Ibrahim is following developments in Israel from Bethlehem in the occupied West Bank. And Nida, Donald Trump saying Israel has been prohibited. He's prohibited Israel from striking Lebanon. Pretty strong language. How's that going down in Israel?
Well, it won't go down very well. It won't be really appreciated in Israel. This is a country that has been forced twice to ceasefires, one in Iran and one in Lebanon, although it kept reiterating. The Israeli officials kept saying that the front with Lebanon is separate from that with Iran. And from experience, when we talk about ceasefire, Israel does not necessarily abide by the terms of the ceasefire and uses excuses like the other party has breached it, so it continues bombarding these countries. We're talking about the same scenario happening in Lebanon in the previous ceasefire that was agreed on in 2024 when Israel continued striking targets that it said is in response to Hezbollah's breaches of the ceasefire. We see the same scenario happening time and again in Gaza.
Yeah, she's a liar too.
This language from Trump is very strong, and it's not going to play down very well for Netanyahu, who has been promising his people great victories in Iran and in Lebanon, and he could not provide them with that or any tangible results from the big goals that he started this war with providing his people. Now, when we talk about President Trump, Netanyahu knows very well not to upset him in public, not to talk about any disagreement. On the contrary, when you hear the words of Netanyahu, you hear him talking about Israel and the U.S. being on the same page, fighting in the same front. So all of that is not going to help him in the elections that are going to happen in October by the end of this year, because the polls in the beginning of the war with Iran showed a very high support for Netanyahu and for the war. But that support started decreasing and diminishing. And now we are seeing a majority, more than 58% of Israelis, according to polls, are in disagreement or do not want this ceasefire with Lebanon now that Israel might not be able to bombard as well. Let's see, though, how Netanyahu is going to spin this for his benefit or try and sabotage these talks and the potential deals.
Thanks so much, Nida Ibrahim, our correspondent, reporting to us from Bethlehem in the occupied West Bank. You're watching Al Jazeera. Time to recap our headlines.
Welcome,
Iran says it has fully reopened the Strait of Hormuz to commercial vessels. The decision is tied to a new 10-day ceasefire in Lebanon, which Tehran had asked for as part of its truce with the US.
Bibi doesn't care about them.
Ships crossing the strait will take a route designated by its maritime authorities. And US President Donald Trump has welcomed the announcement, but he says a US naval blockade of the strait will remain in full force till Iran reaches a deal with Washington. Brent crude prices
And what's the point
are
of all these
down
announcements?
sharply after Iran announced it was reopening the Strait of Hormuz. The stock market has opened in the US, with the major indices of all posting gains at the bell. Let's speak to our chief US correspondent, Alan Fisher. He joins us now from Washington, D.C. And Alan, we've got even more lines to decipher now. Let's start with the Iran front and dynamic. The US president saying Iran is removing, with the help of the USA, sea mines. Talk about going in, wherever that is, at a leisurely pace to recover uranium or dust. Talking about Iran agreeing to suspend
That's not
its
going to
nuclear
happen.
program. I mean, when you look at all that,
Suspend?
is there anything left to discuss?
I thought they had to give
then,
it up
if
completely
all
forever.
That has been agreed.
What happened to that?
Well, of course, you can get an outline agreement, but when the technicalities start to be discussed, that's when it becomes an issue. And of course, we're hearing what the United States is getting out of this. What was still to be decided, what we've still to get any clarity on, is what Iran gets out of this deal. They obviously feel slightly at a disadvantage, but many people would argue that they are emerging from this war fairly strong, fairly resolute, that of course they've lost a lot.
Right, Carl?
But they've actually forced the United States to give up quite a bit as well.
Oh, some people believe
Not sure
his
if I
lies,
personally
Belinda.
agree with that argument, but Donald Trump believes that there could be a deal. He's talking about perhaps talks starting by the end of the weekend. That would fit in with the end of the time
Bibi
scale
is
that he's been
absolutely
talking
disgusting.
about. Remember, he talked about this war being 3 or 4 weeks. It's been slightly longer than that. But he would like to see a solution sooner rather than later for a number of reasons. Some of them economic, some of them political. We've
Trump's
talked about
diehard
them
supporters
at
believe
length.
in Belinda.
Clearly, he believes that they're
They'll go to
getting
the grave never
very, very
admitting they were
close to
wrong.
a deal, and very, very close to the deal that he wants, which is no nuclear weapons ever, something he's campaigned on significantly, that he won't be handing any money over to the Iranian regime, something he was reluctant to be seen to be doing, given his previous criticism of Barack Obama, and the fact that they will go in at some point with the Iranians to try and recover the enriched uranium, or nuclear dust, as Donald Trump keeps calling it, that was hit during Operation Midnight Hammer in the summer. So things seem to be developing. As things are being agreed, it's being passed on to him. We know that discussions have been going on behind the scenes. It might not involve the main players of J.D. Vance, Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner.
I hope so,
But
Belinda.
it's clear that the Pakistanis have continued to keep lines between the two sides open. What was important after the talks collapsed, ended is probably the better word, in Islamabad at the weekend, is that neither side walked away and said, we're done, that's it, we can't get a deal. So the communication lines were always open, and it appears that in just under a week they've been able to get something that the United States, on the face of it here, can live with. Whether or not the Iranians can, we'll find out.
And Alan, we've also got to talk about the Lebanon dynamic. Something repeatedly, I think in the last 2 hours, Donald Trump has said on his Truth Social is not linked to the Iran deal. But he's also using this very strong language, saying Israel is forbidden from bombing Lebanon. What does the wording
he's been a
tell us?
scumbag since the 80s, Carl.
It's incredibly
He always
strong,
came
but
across
it's
as a
not something
grifter
you
and a
tend to
weirdo.
hear from a US president, that Israel doesn't often get spoken to like that from the White House. And when they do, they often just say, so what are you going to do about it? We know about the strength that they have on Capitol Hill. We know about the support that Israel has on Capitol Hill. We know how much money
Far too
Israel
much.
gets from the United States
Far
every
too
year.
much of my
And
tax
often
dollars,
the
our
Israelis
tax
have thought
dollars,
they would never,
going to
ever,
Israel
have to justify
commit war
what
crimes.
they do to the United States at any point. But here we have a president that Benjamin Netanyahu has said several times is the best friend that Israel has ever had in the White House. Excuse me. And so he has effectively, by the use of social media, backed them into a corner. Of course, the test will come If Israel decides that it's at threat, it has a risk, it needs to take some action in southern Lebanon and restarts or continues bombing, then there will be an issue between the United States and the White House. There are many ways out of it, but it's incredibly strong language, and it's a position that publicly no US president has taken before. There's been many disagreements behind the scenes, many harsh words used about the Israelis by many American presidents. But no one has ever come out with such strong language and said that the Israelis are forbidden from doing something. What will be interesting is to see the reaction from some members of Benjamin Netanyahu's cabinet, particularly those who've sung the praises of Donald Trump in the past, and see how they react to what Donald Trump has put on social media in the last few hours.
Thanks so much to our chief US correspondent, Alan Fisher, reporting to us and breaking it all down for us outside the White House there. Thanks so much.
So things are de-escalating is what you're saying.
Now joined in the studio by Hassan Ahmadian. He's an associate professor at the University of Tehran. Good to have you with me here in the studio. So, Professor, first of all, let's take apart some of these lines that have been dropping fast and furious in the last couple of hours. Donald Trump saying Iran has agreed to suspend its nuclear program indefinitely. How likely is it that Iran has agreed, in your understanding, to suspend its entire nuclear program indefinitely?
There's nothing that has been agreed so far on the nuclear program.
But why then would the US president make this kind of statement if Iran is
because he's manipulating the stock market.
I think the negotiations that are to basically restart with the mediation of Pakistan are about this. So there's no negotiations now that he basically forced the ceasefire, which was supposed to happen in, parallel to Iran's ceasefire. It was a regional ceasefire agreement with the unfreezing of Iranian assets for Iran to
That's what the mediator of Pakistan said in their understanding.
Iran and Pakistan said so, but Israel violated it, and so Iran said that wartime situation in the Hormuz will continue. Now, with the ceasefire in Lebanon, talks of unfreezing Iran's assets, the Strait of Hormuz being dealt with differently by Iran. Not that different,
We'll
but
talk
still.
in a minute about the Strait of Hormuz, but I want to finish first these lines about what Donald Trump is saying has been agreed. And he's saying, we will go in at a leisurely pace to recover uranium, which we think refers to the 60%
He's insane.
plus
This is
enriched
not going to
uranium.
happen.
Again, how likely, from your understanding, is it that Iran will agree
They're
to
going to
allow
let
US
troops
I guess,
go in there?
forces to go in and recover enriched uranium to that degree?
Yeah, I wanted to get to this point. So far, nuclear is subject to discussion. There's no agreement on anything on the nuclear file.
Right.
There are ideas mediated by Pakistan back and forth between Iran and the United States, but there's no agreement. I can say that with certainty. But Iran basically has a red line on its nuclear program. You can't just ask it to indefinitely freeze its enrichment because that's a right. It has, in accordance with the international law, with the treaty, the
NPT.
The NPT, basically. And so
War ain't
it's
over
not
yet.
willing to give it up. And I think him talking about Iran giving up its uranium is also
Well, that would probably be a
unrealistic.
bad move for
Iranians came
Putin.
up with ideas before the war.
To
and I
expand
think
the
they are
war
sticking
that he's
with
already
those
not
ideas.
That's what I was
really
gonna
winning?
say. It was reported before the war through the Omani mediators that there had been a breakthrough in handing over the plus 60% enriched uranium.
It's not handing over. It's bringing it down
Diluting
diluting it to 20% and then to 3.67%, which is for peaceful purposes only, according to the IAEA. And so
you don't think it's realistic that they will now agree to the US going in there and taking
there's
that
a
enriched?
there's a threshold to getting into an agreement on this.
Okay.
For two reasons. The Iranians are saying this is our right, and second, they are not that they don't have that much of stockpile to give this up, and then when the United States violates its commitments, then to enrich again. They don't have much.
What are the odds
uranium,
Trump
so
would
it's not-
violate
All right,
our
let's
commitments?
Let's talk about the Straits of Hormuz, and the US president also saying Iran has agreed to never close the Straits of Hormuz again. Again, how likely is that, do you think?
Well, that's, I think, depends on how the United States acts. Basically, when there was agreement, as I said, they violated it in two basic, points: Lebanon and then the unfreezing of assets. Iran also said we are not bound to it. Now, if the United States is to violate its commitments, I can see that the Iranians will also go back to where they were.
Well, he's already saying that Iran will not receive any frozen funds from the US. So is it likely that the Iranians will take that step without any promise of unfreezing their assets?
I can't imagine a scenario in which the Iranians would have done so without receiving promises from the mediators that this will happen. Because that was a package offered to Iran, and Iran accepted it. And based on it, started dealing with the United States indirectly through Pakistan and went to the negotiations. Now that Iran is announcing that the situation in the Strait is changing, I can imagine that there is an agreement on this.
So I'm listening to everything you're saying, Professor, and this is what I'm wondering now. It basically sounds like you're saying pretty much everything that the US president has announced is not accurate, is not correct. Why are we not hearing anything from the Iranian side? Doesn't that silence tell us something?
Well, the silence is basically not that weird when it comes to Tehran, because they.
No, we're going to have to wait and see what happens with Putin, right, War?
The mood of President Trump, who just basically comes out and gives different announcements. I suspect that the Iranians will come out with their narrative. There have been some points, being raised by people in Tehran, but it's the official line. It's Friday today, so you will hear more.
This new maritime, shall we call it, arrangement, is Iran going to be able to enforce that long term without the objections of other states, because it pushes the maritime traffic into Iranian territorial waters? Does that not violate the UN Convention on the Law of the Seas, Articles 37 to 39, that talk about the right of unimpeded passage for ships?
Yeah, sure.
I kind of agree with you, Belinda.
Of course. But the reality is that the deepest route goes through Iran's territorial water. So Iran is not changing the route for that purpose. It doesn't need to.
But before February 28th, the ships were not restricted to only that passage.
No, I know, but
there is a change, right?
But the ships that are heavy or heavier, they usually go through Iran's territorial water because it's deeper. So they don't need to change anything. They can just, in accordance with international law, observe what's going in and out. And they have said, with the announcement by Mr. Arakchi, they have said that it's the Supreme National Security Council's
I agree, Shadow.
announcement.
We shouldn't put U.S. troops on the ground.
Firstly,
I don't want to see American kids coming home in body bags.
Innocent passage for ships that are commercial or energy-related, not military. And secondly, they should be observed by Iran's Navy. So it's basically that same announcement that was announced before.
Well, I have so many more questions, but I'm already being told that the time is up. I apologize. We're going to have to leave it there. Professor Hassan Ahmadian, professor from the University of Tehran, thank you so much for coming in. And now, while Trump has said Israel is now prohibited from attacking Lebanon, weeks of Israeli
I don't blame you, Belinda.
widespread damage, uprooting families, destroying tens
How's your
of thousands of
gasoline
homes.
situation doing over there?
Its systematic targeting of residential areas may amount to war crimes. Julie Daiger now.
The Israeli military has killed more than 2,000 people across Lebanon since March the 2nd. Its airstrikes have been concentrated on the south. That's where Israeli forces have launched a ground invasion and are occupying swathes of territory. But across Lebanon, Israel's attacks have either damaged or destroyed nearly 40,000 housing units in the first 35 days of the conflict. Now, that's according to the National Council for Scientific Research, and that number amounts to an average of just over 1,000 homes per day. The fighting has displaced at least 1.2 million people nationwide. Many of them have fled southern areas towards the north, which they consider safer, and others have crossed the border into Syria. But many have been forced to sleep outside, often in the streets without access to adequate water, food, or medical care. Israel has also systematically targeted civilian infrastructure, and that includes, again, either destroying or damaging the main bridges that cross the Litani River, as you can see here. And these connect the south to the rest of Lebanon. These are satellite images showing the Kashmir Bridge. And as you can see in the before and afters, the damage from those Israeli strikes is severe. Now, this bridge was an important link to hospitals and schools for people in the region. As part of its occupation and invasion, the Israeli military has been leveling entire villages in southern Lebanon. And rights groups say the systematic demolition of residential areas, which you can clearly see here, may amount to a war crime.
Yazid Sayegh is from the Malcolm H. Kerr Carnegie Middle East Center. He explains how Trump's remarks on prohibiting Israeli attacks in Lebanon can be interpreted.
Politically, when he says that Israel may not strike Lebanon anymore, I think we can take that as a very direct and open political message to Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. On the other hand, the expectation that all of a sudden the Lebanese government is going to be able to disarm Hezbollah while Israeli troops are still inside Lebanon, while they appear so far to be continuing to demolish border villages, I don't think the Lebanese government is actually making that kind of commitment. But you know, one can interpret President Trump's tweets on this as part of a broad direction that if things keep going in this direction, then the Lebanese government is expected to fulfill its own public position, deeming Hezbollah's military activities illegal and that it has to surrender its weapons. That's already been there on the table for about 6 weeks. I don't think the Lebanese government is able to proceed unilaterally with disarming Hezbollah unless there's a wider political context that makes that feasible, that allows Hezbollah's main Shia partner, the Amal movement, headed by the Speaker of House, Nabi Berri, to agree with any such behavior, because otherwise he would simply block that entirely, as he's done in the past. And I think, again, this is all up to Iran. Iran is not going to let go of Hezbollah in Lebanon so long as it hasn't got what it wants out of the United States administration vis-a-vis an end to the potential threats of military attack by the United States, or I think also by Israel, against Iran. Until that deal is reached, Hezbollah's status in Lebanon, I don't think will change. Iran will fight for it. And so again, I think that everything hinges on what finally the US administration and the Iranian leadership reach in terms of a bigger deal.
Let's take a look now at some of the world's other news. The head of the Roman Catholic Church, Pope Leo, is visiting the Catholic University of Central Africa in Cameroon. The pontiff highlighted the university's role in forming future leaders. Pope Leo also condemned the use of AI to fuel, quote, polarization, conflicts, fear and violence. Earlier, the pontiff held Mass in Douala, where an estimated 120,000 people attended his address. On Thursday, Pope Leo gave Mass in the English-speaking city of Bamenda. It's in Cameroon's Anglophone region, which is scarred by conflict. Since 2017, fighting between government forces and separatists has killed more than 6,000 people and displaced another 700,000. The Norwegian Refugee Council calls it one of the world's most neglected conflicts. Nicholas Huck reports from Bamenda.
He appears to float through the crowd, so close and yet out of reach. On one side of the barrier, Pope Leo XIV. On the other, 12-year-old Yannick, a pontiff carrying the faith, a child carrying the suffering of war. Other local people display gestures of love,
Liverpool
but
jersey.
can he deliver peace to the masses?
I want to say the gunshot stop, because I want to say the peace day Cameroon.
The highest thing we need is peace. We need restoration from everything that is happening. We have suffered a lot.
Here, the Pope is leading a service in the heart of Bamenda. For Cameroon's government, this is the English-speaking Northwest region. President Biya last visited the region 17 years ago. For separatist groups, it is the capital of Ambazonia, a nation they want to make their own. an English-speaking minority in a Francophone country, they say they face discrimination.
There's heavy security presence here because outside of the premises in the distance are hideouts for Ambazonian fighters, and there's been several attacks ahead of the Pope's visit. Now, they have called for a truce for the Pope's presence here, but many people here want to see more than that. They're calling for a permanent ceasefire and a solution to this conflict that has lasted far too long.
Now an English-speaking Pope, finally speaking their language. Normally soft-spoken, he's bringing light to their plight.
The world is being ravaged by a handful of tyrants. The masters of war pretend not to know that it takes only a moment to destroy.
They should
Yet
piss Trump
often,
off.
A lifetime is often not enough to rebuild.
A religious figure carrying both a moral and political message. He leaves Bamenda trying to break the divide between the powerful and the people. In a world that appears to be still searching, still waiting, still praying for peace. Nicholas Hawk, Al Jazeera, Bamenda.
A wolf that escaped from a zoo in South Korea has been found alive and well after a marathon 9-day search. The wolf led veterinarians, police, fire crews, even drones on the days-long chase before he was darted with a tranquilizer. Perry Wilton has the story.
It's a capture that captured South Korea's imagination. These are the dramatic final moments of a 9-day search operation that saw emergency services scrambling to find a 4-legged fugitive. The 2-year-old male wolf called Nuku escaped from a zoo by digging under a fence. Hundreds of firefighters, police officers, vets, and even troops supported by drones gave chase. After a tip-off, they finally tracked him down near a highway interchange, about 4 kilometers from the zoo.
0시 39분. Using a tranquilizer gun, Nuku was anesthetized and his
Right,
capture
Belinda?
was completed in just 5 minutes. Afterwards, he was transported to the animal hospital. The initial examination showed that his overall health was relatively good and the blood tests revealed no notable abnormalities.
Born in captivity in 2024, Nuku is a 3rd-generation descendant of a pack of wolves brought from Russia in 2008. It was part of a conservation project to restore the population of the Korean wolf, which went extinct in the 1960s. O World Zoo says Nuku will be kept in isolation until he is fully recovered. Vets removed a fishing hook from his stomach but found no other significant health issues. Despite the local media attention, the zoo has been closed since his escape and will take some time to reopen. But Nuku's return will likely have his fans howling in delight. Perry Wilton, Al Jazeera.
Before we take a quick break, a reminder of our top stories now. Iran says it has fully reopened the Strait of Hormuz to commercial vessels, the decision tied to a new 10-day ceasefire in Lebanon, which Tehran had asked for as part of its truce with the US. Iran says ships crossing the strait will take a route designated by its maritime authorities. The Revolutionary Guard Navy says military vessels remain prohibited from passing the strait. US President Donald Trump has welcomed the announcement, but he says a US naval blockade of the strait will remain in full force until Iran reaches a deal with Washington.
Right, Belinda?
And Trump has said Iran will work with Washington to demine the strait. Tehran, however, has not confirmed such an arrangement.
Have they confirmed anything?
Brent crude prices are down sharply after Iran announced it was easing restrictions at the Strait of Hormuz. The stock market has opened in the US with all major indices at posting gains. Stay with us.
The latest news.
Displaced families in Gaza say fiberglass tents are sturdier and the shelters fall far short of the reconstruction that was promised.
And detailed coverage.
They say they're receiving patients with multiple kinds of injuries caused by devastating aerial weapons every day.
From around the world.
This scene isn't about fuel. It's about how war far beyond Sudan's border is quietly reshaping life here.
In-depth analysis of the day's headlines.
Diplomacy, yet again, was used as a ruse for war.
Critical debate.
Who betrayed the table? Who attacked the negotiations for the second time? For the third time during the talks we should be attacked? Who is talking about a greater country for itself? Israel, not Iran.
Iran has been a huge supporter of terrorism over the years. I really have to take exception to the idea that Iran is innocent in this.
Inside Story on Al Jazeera.
This story that really captured the attention of so many people around the world is now reaching this tragic of the missing Titan. What happens here in the agricultural heartland of America can directly affect food prices in various parts of the world.
Hello, I'm Riley Carlson. This is Al Jazeera live from Doha. Here's what's coming up. Iran says the Strait of Hormuz is completely open to commercial ships for the remainder of the ceasefire. President Trump has reacted with a flurry of social media posts. He says
Trump's
the
a
US
stable
blockade
genius.
of Iranian ports will remain in place. In Lebanon, thousands of people displaced by Israeli attacks return home as the 10-day ceasefire begins. That's as Trump says Israel is now barred from bombing the country, saying enough is enough. Thank you for joining us. Tehran says it has fully reopened the Strait of Hormuz to commercial vessels. It comes after a 10-day ceasefire in Lebanon.
Yes, he
took effect
does.
on
Well, he probably
Thursday.
thinks he's better than
Iran
Jesus.
has asked for that as part of
I'm
its
sure he
truce
thinks Jesus
with the
was some
United States.
commie lib or
On social
something.
media, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said ships transiting the strait would take a route designated by Iran's maritime authorities. President Donald Trump is welcome to the news, but he says that the U.S. naval blockade on Iran will remain in full force as talks to end that war continue. A 2-week ceasefire between Washington and Tehran is due to end on Wednesday. Trump says the deal is mostly complete. This live map gives you the picture right now of the Strait of Hormuz. The red dots and arrows you can see are oil tankers. The green ones are other commercial vessels. Maritime traffic data indicates an Iranian-flagged oil tanker and a bulk cargo ship crossed the strait soon after Tehran's announcement. Around a fifth of global oil supplies are normally transported through this waterway. It's been largely closed since the start of the Iran conflict nearly 7 weeks ago, leaving hundreds of vessels stranded. Al Jazeera's Ali Hashim is standing by for us live in Tehran. But first, let's go to our chief U.S. correspondent, Alan Fisher, who joins us now from the White House. Alan, the president has had a lot to say in just the past hour or so on what's happening in the Middle East. He's now reportedly said that Iran will suspend its nuclear program. What more can you tell us about this flurry of news from the White House?
Well, he's doing the old New York trick, which is to call various reporters to get his side of the story. He doesn't need to take a lot of difficult or awkward questions. What he has said is that the deal is effectively done, that there is going to be a ceasefire, but he doesn't have it on paper yet, and he wants that. Now, he's also said that he expects the deal to be done by the end of the weekend, and effectively, he believes that the United States has got everything that it wanted. It will be able to ensure that Iran does not get a nuclear weapon. There is no time limit on the fact that they are putting a moratorium on their nuclear weapons program. They will access the nuclear dust, as he calls it, the enriched uranium, which is thought to be buried deep beneath the Iranian nuclear plants that were bombed in the summer during Operation Midnight Hammer. He will not hand over any money to Iran. That doesn't say that they won't be able to unfreeze assets in other parts of the world, but there'll be no money.
Trump says one thing today and does something completely different the next.
Has now been reopened. The blockade stays in place until he gets a deal. All of these things Donald Trump was very keen to sort out very quickly. Now, he's been talking for a couple of days, saying there was no need to extend the ceasefire, which has got 4 days left. He also said that he believed the deal would be done in the next couple of days. He said he trusted the Pakistani mediators. What is likely to have happened is a lot of work is going on behind the scenes. Eventually, the big names will go in and put their final seal on the deal. Donald Trump is talking about possibly flying to Islamabad if he thinks the deal is done. J.D. Vance is certainly on standby, ready to go as well. We know that from the talks that didn't collapse but ended in Pakistan last weekend. So everything seems to be moving in the right direction. There's certainly momentum from the announcements that we've seen from Donald Trump over the last few hours, that he's been essentially putting on social media all the things that seem to have been accepted by the Iranians. But
Why
of
would they
course,
send the couch
anyone who's
fucker
run a
again?
marathon will tell you that
It was
the
an
last
epic
kilometre
failure.
is the hardest. It's getting that deal on paper. It's making sure that the Iranians are getting what they want from the deal, to give up what Donald Trump is suggesting they're about to give up.
And crucially, that is a side we haven't yet heard from. That's our chief U.S. correspondent, Alan Fisher, live for us at the White House. So let's take that to Ali Hashem, who is live for us in the Iranian capital. Ali, lots of claims by President Trump on what Iran has agreed to here. But what are officials in Tehran saying?
Well, according to an Iranian source I just spoke to, he said that there's nothing like this yet. I mean, the
fire achieved has been the sum of efforts of many. It is the fruit of sacrifice made by you that reawakened the conscience of the people as those who held steadfast on the fire fronting line. We have made it clear to the whole world we are holding our ground. We cannot abandon our homeland. Thank you to all who opened the doors to their fellow citizens. It is the fruit of massive efforts made by all the Lebanese, together with others, friends of Lebanon worldwide. It is the fruit of those who work day and night, initiating communications in all directions and at all levels. We did not falter or fell weary. We've lived up to the responsibility and the duty. We have endured massively. We have endured accusations and false allegations and malicious ones until it is proven that we are on the right side of history. And it is proven to the whole world that what we did was to the best interest of our country, and it is the most rightful course of action to take. And here I would like to extend all thanks and appreciation to all those who contributed to reaching this ceasefire, from the US President Trump to all the Arab brothers, namely and chiefly the Saudi Arabia, on whose
Gotta kiss
friendship
Trump's
we
ass.
all rely to complete what we started today and achieve what we aspire to achieve. Today, we are standing at a defining moment. It is the point where we should move from a ceasefire towards realizing comprehensive permanent agreements that safeguards our sovereignty and territorial integrity. And at this point, like ever before, we are certain that we will salvage our homeland, Lebanon. We are also adamant and certain that we will come under attack, simply for the reason that we have restored Lebanon. We have restored our decision for the first time in decades. For the first time, we are negotiating on our own behalf and handing down decisions on our own behalf. We cannot allow Lebanon to be a battleground for any party. We are a country that has its own say, and epitomizing this in words and in action to the best interest of its people and nothing else. To you, my countrymen, I say with absolute veracity and confidence that these negotiations is not a sign of weakness. It is not a sign of waver or consignment, concession. It is based on our keenness, on our interests, and to do all what is needed to safeguard our home soil. We cannot bow to any party. Negotiation did not and will never mean that we will waive any right or to give up any principle or undermine the sovereignty of our homeland. Thousands of Lebanese have sacrificed their lives, and we cannot forget them or allow them to be forgotten. And we cannot allow for any citizen to fall in future for the interest of others or for calculations of other proxies, near or far. Between suicide and prosperity, we chose to take the course of prosperity. And from malicious, misleading reports that brainwash the voices, I
I don't even
stand
want to
in with
think
the
about it,
voice
Belinda.
of reason. Between
Hopefully he's
pointless
just dead
agendas
soon.
on the pretext of foreign enterprises and between devotion to our homeland in prosperity and dignity, I, with my people, in on the side of life in prosperity and dignity. I reiterate that I am prepared to take the full responsibility for all the choices I made, and I'm prepared to go at any length to protect my home soil and protect my own people and salvage my country. My mission is clear and one, to salvage the homeland and its people. And this is what I'm going to achieve with absolute patriotic and ethical responsibility. And I'm certain that you are all with me in secret and in the open, with your minds and your hearts. You are on my side simply for the reason that I know the magnitude of sacrifices made by you. And I know the meaning of how to lose a dear one, a loved one, or your own home or sense of security. With absolute resolve, I say, pain cannot remain our destiny. And I am renewing with the voice of pledge and promise that we will not achieve any agreement that may undermine our established rights or injure the dignity of our steadfast people or give up a grain of soil of our homeland. Our objective is clear: to put an end to the Israeli aggression on our people, on our homeland, and the total withdrawal of the Israelis and the prevailing of our authority across every inch, and the return of all the Lebanese with dignity and freedom. To my fellow countrymen, the strength and might of our homeland lies in the awareness of people, its unity and coexistence in line with our patriotic charter. One state with total devotion and loyalty. One constitution to which we all resort. One rule of law and under which we all, or by which we are all governed. And one armed forces to safeguard and protect us all. Do not allow the malicious voices to sow the seeds of rift. Do not be misled by those who are playing on the harps of your emotions to build their glory at the expense of your stability. Live above the fantasies of those misleading. And what we are doing is for your safety, protection, and your dignified, peaceful, stable life, and in order to provide our posterity a more robust and stable future, rather than causing them to inherit numbers of victims. Make no mistakes that we are all working to protect our homeland, and each home destroyed with which part of our memory is destroyed. That's why together, hand in hand, we will rebuild our home country. All the Lebanese are on one ship. Either we steer it with prudence and wisdom, or to cause it to sink, and with which we will all sink. We will all drown. We cannot allow for this crime to be perpetrated under the pretext of any slogan or anything or any loyalty to any but to Lebanon and its people. I plead to you for all the sacrifices made and out of loyalty to the steadfast people to open your minds and hearts and do not lose sight or fall to listen to the reason, the voice of reason. Do not be misled with all empty slogans. To the displaced citizens, I address you. And I say you will return home and your homes will be rebuilt. We will be on your side and we cannot fail you. And to those holding their grounds on the forefront, make no mistake, we will provide all redress. And to those who gamble with the fate of Lebanon on all the Lebanese, I say, gamble with the fate of Lebanon on all the Lebanese, I say, enough. Enough with it. It is only one agenda, the agenda of one unified sovereign Lebanon. And to the whole world, I say, Lebanon cannot be held captive, nor our people be brought to their knees, and we will live by the will of our people. Long live Lebanon, long live my people.
Okay, you've been listening to the Lebanese President Joseph Aoun, who's been speaking in Beirut, giving a fiery and passionate defense of the ceasefire deal that was agreed to on Thursday and the idea that talks could potentially take place with Israel. I want to bring in our correspondent Malcolm Webb, if we can, who joins us live from Beirut and who is listening along to this with us. Malcolm, if you can hear me, I want to get your thoughts on this because President Aoun was speaking very clearly, addressing some of the criticism that there has been about this idea of possible talks in Lebanon, saying, I take full responsibility for the choices I make. I will go to any lengths to protect my homeland, and calling on the Lebanese people to unite behind this idea, saying that we are doing this for you, your stability and protection, and a dignified, stable life. How significant was this address by the president?
Well, some of the things that he said are what you'd expect. Others certainly raised quite a lot of questions. He did say we for the first time, we're negotiating on our own behalf.
I agree, Belinda.
Of course, the first time in 30 years, about 30
What kind
years,
of future?
There've been direct
I have a
talks
5-year-old
between,
granddaughter, and I fear for her future all the time.
And he also said we
This
will
world's
not
a
make
mess.
any agreement that undermines our sovereignty or give up a grain of soil of our homeland. This seems to be directed at Hezbollah supporters who are, many of them, frustrated at the moment about the government entering a negotiation with Israel at a point that Israel has occupied parts of southern Lebanon, some places up to 10 kilometers from the border. There's still an Israeli military presence there, and even reports of some weapons being fired today. But Orn said that they were expecting a total withdrawal of Israeli forces. It's not clear how that's going to happen, or if that's going to happen. Israel's made it clear it has no intention.
The how is easy. Turn around and get the fuck out of there.
Taken control of, and so of course everyone will be waiting to see if this is something that Iran demands, or if this is something that the US demands, following those tweets from Trump earlier saying that he was prohibiting Israel from bombing Lebanon. Withdrawal, there is another question. It's something Israel doesn't want to do. It's something, of course, that people who've been forced from those villages in the south want, something that Orn says he wants, but I don't know how he's going to go about getting it.
Right. And to that point, Malcolm, we know that hundreds of thousands of people in Lebanon have been forced from their homes since this conflict began. In that speech, he said, you will return home and your home will be rebuilt. But as you mentioned, for the foreseeable future, at least for the immediate future, there is still an Israeli occupation in southern Lebanon. Are people moving home now? Are they going to check on their homes? What have you been seeing around Lebanon as this ceasefire sort of begins to take hold?
Well, Hezbollah said that people should be patient and that it would be monitoring the ceasefire and that people shouldn't go home just yet. But thousands of people nonetheless have. Some in Beirut have returned to the southern suburbs, just down there, from where about 500,000 people were displaced, forced from their homes. And thousands have also been heading south. There was traffic on the roads earlier, but many of them going back to places that they found, well, water, electricity cut off, bridges. The main bridges that connect the south with the rest of the country have all been destroyed. And many people going back to find homes, businesses, and livelihoods destroyed. And of course, no possibility of returning for those people from the villages which are occupied by the Israeli military, where the Israeli military has also carried out systematic demolitions because it seemingly doesn't want anybody to go back there because it wants to create, it said, a buffer zone, a security zone along the border. That's at odds with what President Orn just said.
Al Jazeera's Malcolm Webb reporting live for us in Beirut. Malcolm, thank you. Okay, let's return to our top story now and go back to Al Jazeera's Ali Hashim, who is in the Iranian capital of Tehran. Ali, I apologize for interrupting. Thank you for staying with us while we went and heard from the Lebanese president. You were talking about what you've been hearing from sources inside Tehran on this flurry of activity from the U.S. president about things that Iran has apparently agreed to. What can you tell us?
Calm down, pussyfoot.
To these points, actually, the source said clearly that the next step will be agreeing on a framework for negotiations, not a final agreement. Issues of uranium enrichment and the fate of the highly enriched uranium are to be decided in the talks and haven't been decided yet. Also, the source said that Iran had outlined around 10 conditions to initiate negotiations, including the issues in Lebanon. In parallel, there has been a calibrated response in the Strait of Hormuz, the source noted, referring to the limited control opening of maritime traffic. The source added, at this stage, we are still at the beginning of the process, not at the level of a finalized agreement. Now, more from the spokesperson of the Iranian Foreign Ministry, Ismail Baqai, who gave an interview to the Iranian television. He said that they had no discussions about an extension of the framework of the ceasefire, understanding and that it was for 2 weeks. Also, regarding the naval blockade by the United States, he considered it as a violation of ceasefire, and Iran will take the necessary reciprocal action. He also said that the passage of ships in the Strait of Hormuz will take place along the route designated by Iran and in coordination with the relevant Iranian authorities. So once again, we are not talking about an open strait, rather a managed passage of vessels within this strait in coordination with the Iranian armed forces. He says if the other side intends to act in bad faith, which is apparently going to happen, and if the naval blockade continues, the Islamic Republic of Iran will in return take the necessary measures, and there is no doubt about that. So we are actually in a situation where both sides are using narratives to face each other. So it's a war of narratives right now, regardless of what's going on behind the closed doors.
Ali Hashim reporting live for us from Tehran. Ali, thank you for all of that. We appreciate it.
I think he's talking about Trump,
by
Belinda.
Hassan Ahmadian, an associate professor at the University of Tehran. Thank you very much for being here. We just heard that reporting from Ali on what Tehran has been saying in response to the president's claims. I just want to remind our viewers about what some of those are. He says that the U.S. will enter Iran and take control of the enriched uranium, that Iran agreed not to close the Strait of Hormuz in the future. There are also reports from the U.S. that Iran agreed to suspend its nuclear program indefinitely and will not receive any frozen funds from the United States. There have been a few denials, as Ali was reporting from Tehran from that. But what is your assessment of what we're hearing, this back and forth, this war of narratives, as Ali put it?
These points brought up by President Trump doesn't make sense when it comes to Iran's consistent policy over the past few years, and including during this war. We know for sure that there is no deal, and until everything is agreed on, nothing is agreed on. And so him coming out and saying that, well, Iran agreed to this and this and this on all sensitive issues does not rhyme with reality and what we hear from Tehran. We know that there's a deal on ceasefire.
Yep.
According to that, Lebanon ceasefire came later than Iran ceasefire, and Iran is changing now the situation in the Strait of Hormuz, though it's keeping it to commercial and energy-related shipments, not to military ones, and in coordination with Iran's Navy. So according with its Supreme National Security Council's announcement, nothing has changed in Iran's position if you look at Iran's consistent messaging. But him, I think, coming up with this we won, narrative that Iran agreed to this and this and this, I think is to drift attention apart from what he gave to Iran, basically. That is
But we
the
don't know what that
ceasefire.
might be.
That's the ceasefire in Lebanon, and secondly, the unfreezing of assets. That was part of the ceasefire to begin with, the ceasefire in Iran. It was supposed that the ceasefire in Lebanon would come along with the ceasefire in Iran. It came later, and now the unfreezing of assets that is being discussed in Tehran is coming along as well.
That the president says is not happening. So I wonder, all of this public back and forth between the two, does that help or hinder negotiations for either side?
Well, I think everyone has a narrative, and obviously President Trump has his own narrative. He got involved in an illegal war, and now he's trying to make an exit that looks like a win for him. We know that the war didn't go according to his plans or Bibi Netanyahu's plan. That's for sure, according to their announcements of goals for this war. And now they are, the president is dealing with Iran to come to terms. They were negotiating before the war. And now he's back to square one. Now the question is, why did you get involved in this war? And so these back and forth, I think, is part of the reality that unfolded as a result of this war, that he can't say we lost the war. He has to say that we achieved this and this and this. And so the Iranians are saying, okay, announce whatever you want, but reality remains on the ground. That
these negotiations are still ongoing.
Yes.
I want to ask you about this point, these reports that the president says Iran has agreed to expend its nuclear program indefinitely. We know that this was a huge sticking point of negotiation between the two.
Nothing Trump says is true.
Is there anything that the U.S. could have possibly given Iran that would have made them give this concession in return?
That's the core issue in the negotiations. We know that there hasn't been any agreement in the negotiations. We know that there's a ceasefire the negotiations were built on this ceasefire. They didn't achieve anything so far. There will be negotiations, but to say that Iran came to terms with what the United States want without negotiations defies the logic of negotiations to begin with. The Iranians are insisting on their right to enrich uranium. They're insistent on keeping the uranium in their land, but diluting it back to 20% and then 3.67%, which was the JCPOA level enrichment. That's accepted in Iran, but to give it up, that's not a
that would be a big thing.
Official
Hassan
position.
Ahmadian, an associate professor at the University of Tehran. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Brent crude prices are down sharply after Iran announced that it would reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Markets are open
That's
in
just
the
the
United
future
States,
price.
with
That
the
means
major
nothing.
indices all posting gains at the bell. Our Patty Colhane joins us now live from Washington, D.C. So, Patty, to what extent are the markets celebrating this news?
To quite the extent, actually. 903, the Dow Jones Industrial is up. It's been around 1,000, so it seems like that they're paring back just a little bit. But the Dow Jones now sits at 49,492. The high was at 50,000. That was a milestone that the Dow had never reached. That was in February 6th. This isn't just about the war, although today is about the announcements coming out of President Donald Trump. We've seen the market really have highs in the last 2 weeks. That's because it's earnings season here in the United States, where companies are announcing how much money they've made in the quarter, and banks have been reporting record amounts. So we've seen the stock market really sort of continue this pace. The bigger story here is the price of gas. Now, when the war started, right before, gas was Brent crude, which is the benchmark, was at about
you got it, Belinda.
$72 a barrel. That was February
That's all it
27th.
is.
Right now,
He can't look like he failed in any way, so he's going to claim some sort of bullshit victory.
It was before the war started, but not anywhere near where it got to, which is almost $110 a barrel. So what does this mean? Are we all going to see lower gas prices immediately? No. The International Monetary Fund is having their spring meeting here in D.C. They put out a global forecast, and they said, even if the war ends now, the damage has been done.
Hang on.
going to get. Still, it will take, if this is in fact true, and again, we don't know that the strait is actually going to be opened and gas is going to start flowing again. There's been damage to the infrastructure in the region, and that is going to continue to see elevated prices. And so it's not going to come down immediately, but markets believe that this war is headed in the right direction, and they are celebrating. Dow now up 944 points. Might make that 50,000 point today, but it's really been sort of hovering in this exact place.
Okay, that's Al Jazeera's Patty Culhane reporting live for us from Washington, D.C. on how the markets have been reacting to news that the Iranians have said they will open the Strait of Hormuz. Stay with us here on Al Jazeera. We'll have more news at the top of the hour, but first here's a look at that traffic in the Strait of Hormuz. You can see there are ships slowly beginning to move through the strait, but we are still waiting to hear just how that backlog will ease. Inside Story is up next, looking at whether the ceasefire in Lebanon will hold.
Will the ceasefire in Lebanon hold this time? Lebanon and Israel have had their first direct talks in decades, but as Israel considers Hezbollah a threat, is a lasting peace agreement possible? And how much influence does Iran have in Lebanon? This is Inside Story. Hello again, I'm James Bays. A ceasefire is in effect in Lebanon. Israel agreed to the 10-day pause in attacks, but has refused to withdraw its troops from the positions they occupy in the south. The ceasefire was announced after officials met in person in Washington, D.C., the first direct talks since 1993. Now there's a hope of an agreement to end Israel's invasion and airstrikes. Hezbollah remains the main stumbling block. Israel says any deal must include the dismantling of the group, while Hezbollah says it will not lay down its weapons.
Iran said they opened it.
Iran is in discussions with the U.S. to resolve the nearly 7
Trump is still keeping the military there and keeping it closed, even though Iran says it's now open.
In a moment, we'll explore the prospects of peace or renewed tension in Lebanon when we're joined by a panel of guests. But first, this report from Imogen Kimber.
Gunshots ring out in celebration across Beirut as a fragile ceasefire comes into effect. Some of the 1.2 million people displaced from their homes start returning to southern Lebanon, navigating roads and bridges destroyed in Israeli airstrikes. The US brokered the agreement, and President Donald Trump announced it on social media on Thursday. Under it, Israel has committed to pause its military offensive for 10 days, with the caveat that it will act against anything it perceives as a security threat. The Lebanese government says it will work to stop Hezbollah's attacks. However, the group argues that as long as Israeli troops are occupying Lebanese territory, it has the right to resist and will not disarm.
You have an element of strength called the resistance. You want to eliminate it and then go and conduct direct negotiations without any leverage, with the Americans as the mediator. What a beautiful equation.
And Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is adamant Israeli forces will not withdraw from the positions they currently occupy.
A security strip of 10 kilometers in width, which is much stronger, much more intensified, much more continuous, and much more solid than what we had there before. There, we are staying. we're not leaving.
This is the same conundrum from the November 2024 ceasefire and others before it. Trump seems sure things will be different this time round.
What's going to be the difference this time? Me. I'm the big difference. Me.
He's invited Netanyahu and Lebanese President Joseph Aoun to the White House for face-to-face talks.
That'll be the first time they've met in 44 years, which is pretty unneighborly when considering they're neighbors. But there's a really good chance that that'll work out with Lebanon and Israel.
Despite Trump's apparent confidence, many people on both sides of the border are not sure that anything has changed. Within hours, strikes were reported in southern Lebanon, with an ambulance hit in the town of Konin. Imogen Kimber, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
The politics of Lebanon and the wider region is very complicated, but we have the right people to make sense of it today on Inside Story. Joining us from Paris, Joe Macron, a Middle East political analyst. Yossi Meckelberg is in London. He's a senior consulting fellow at the Middle East and North Africa program at Chatham House. And Rami Khoury is distinguished fellow at the American University of Beirut. He joins us from Boston, Massachusetts. Thank you, all three of you, for joining us today. Let me start with you, Rami. Let's just first work out what has been agreed. And there's also the wider political situation regarding Iran and the US. But in terms of this ceasefire, tell me what you understand are the basic terms of this ceasefire.
The basic terms of the ceasefire are that they stop shooting from both sides for 10 days, and the Israelis maintain their American guaranteed right to continue attacking and destroying and assassinating people if they think there's an imminent threat, which they can define any way they want. So this is novel because it is a situation where Hezbollah and Iran have forced the United States and Israel to accept a ceasefire that they didn't really want in Lebanon. They tried to detach Lebanon from the Iran war, but they were forced to accept the ceasefire by Hezbollah and Iran. That's novel and significant, as they were forced to accept the ceasefire with Iran, in Iran itself. What's not significant is that this is a perpetuation and maybe an aggravation of the tradition of the United States stepping in on the side of Israel, guaranteeing Israeli superiority over the condition in the region so that Israel can do anything it wants.
Joe, I mean, for people in Lebanon, can they be too hopeful? Because it's pretty clear we've been here before and not just once.
Hope, it's a difficult question. So I don't know how we're going to move forward. Just to continue the Rami thought, what we have now is an addendum to the ceasefire in November 2024. The last one, we had different interpretations of it. And this one also, we have more different interpretation moving forward. What's different now is we have a different regional dynamic, which is the US and Iran talks that indirectly led to this ceasefire. And then we have, for the first time, a path toward a negotiation, which didn't exist before. So those two, but from the technical aspect, they didn't refer to the mechanism, which is the US, French, Israeli, Lebanese meeting that used to take place in Nakura. So this means we're beyond the status quo of the last 15 months. So we are in a different dynamic now. And the Americans are getting involved directly because the Israelis doesn't want the French to be involved. So we have a lot of various dynamics now. And at the same time, we have Hezbollah arguing that, unlike the November 2024 that Hezbollah never liked, that now Hezbollah is saying we will react if Israeli has a strike. So we have different interpretation now moving forward. And we have also Israeli presence continued in the south of Litani. And you have a Lebanese army who's expected from the American side to step up and come in. So the hope is not related to the Lebanese only. It's related to what the Americans, Iranians will do. It's related to what the Israeli will do and how much space they have from the Americans to do, especially from Trump directly, who's more involved now in the Lebanese file. And we have to see the internal politics in Lebanon, which I know we're going to discuss later, but to see also how this is going to play out in at least in the next 10 days.
Yossi, this follows talks which were pretty unusual.
Yeah, big money maker, but not for us, Belinda.
Between the Lebanon ambassador and the Israel ambassador in Washington, D.C. How significant was that? But I'll also add another part to the question. The Trump administration wanted to go further before there was this ceasefire. They'd wanted the Lebanese President Joseph Aoun to have a phone call with Benjamin Netanyahu. And
Welcome
Aoun
to the
said
stream,
no
Cal.
to that idea.
Yeah, I mean, direct negotiations are very important. It doesn't happen as such since the 1980s, and this didn't happen exactly the way that at least Israel expected, or some parts of the political map in Lebanon expected. But I think this should be the normal situation in which both sides try to resolve their outstanding issue. It doesn't happen like this. I think what the previous speaker said is very important is to look at the internal dynamics and to see, A, that they are capable of not only speaking directly to one another, but reaching an agreement. I think all in all, the essence of the agreement, if you go back to UN Security Council Resolution 1701, 1599, if you go to the ceasefire agreement of 2024, the question at the end of the day is the intentions of the side, but also the ability of both sides, and it's to deal with the dynamic, the internal dynamic within their own countries, to reach an agreement which both sides recognize first and for all the sovereignty of each other, the blue line is the border between the two countries, and there is no one is attacking each other. And what we see now with the ceasefire, it's a short term. There is also danger in this ceasefire that it depends on what happens with Iran. So what happens if the ceasefire with Iran collapses? Does it mean almost immediately and automatically that the ceasefire in between Israel and Lebanon is collapsing, and it will allow Israel to continue attacking Hezbollah,
Japan is in
Lebanon,
the house.
and vice versa. So I think the long of short of it, it's a very fragile ceasefire, and it needs actually addressing it. Why, for instance, President Aoun won't talk directly to Netanyahu? I think most people understand why it puts him in an almost impossible position to do so.
Rami, there you heard Yossi talk about how fragile it is. And one of the things that makes it so fragile is the fact that there are still substantial numbers of Israeli troops in southern Lebanon. And Prime Minister Netanyahu says he's going to keep them there. Let's have a quick look at a map. He says that he's going to keep a security strip that begins at the sea and stretches to Mount Dov and the outskirts of Mount Hermon up to the Syrian border. That's 10 kilometers wide. Isn't that a recipe potentially for real problems, for misunderstandings, all sorts of other problems?
Oh, absolutely. It's also the normal operating system for the state of Israel and the United States that generally backs it, that Israel's priority security is more important than anything that relates to Arab countries. So the agreement that the statement that they put out talked about sovereignty, territorial integrity, and security, but for all, but in practice, when you read through the document that was released, it favors the Israelis. Israelis can attack anytime they want if they feel there's a threat. And for the Israelis, history shows that a threat means a human being who walks around saying, I want to be free and dignified living in my own country. That's a threat. So the Israelis can do whatever they want. And the Americans are the only people who decide what happens. Edging out the French here is a big change, even though the French were not very active in monitoring the ceasefire as they were supposed to be with the Americans. The fact that this is linked to the Iranian-American negotiations is very significant. So there are new elements here, but the old element of Israeli superiority, geographically, sovereignty, security still pertains and is affirmed in this document. So the Israelis, in theory, might leave. I mean, they left the Sinai in Egypt finally years ago after they had a full peace agreement. They left once they left Gaza, but they continued to encircle it and squeeze it to death. So they didn't really leave. In Lebanon, we're going to find out what actually is going to happen. They could leave all that territory if there is a permanent agreement, but there can only be a permanent agreement if there is a link to the Iran situation and to the original Palestine-Israel conflict. That's why Israel and Hezbollah are fighting. That's why Hezbollah was born. That's why Iran got into fighting with Israel, because of the Palestine issue and Israel and Palestine. And now this is an issue that is going to come up over and over and over again if people are honest enough to address it.
Joe, I mean, what Rami said there, it's worth reminding everyone that last time there was a deal like this, 27th of November 2024, the ceasefire then, Israel continued its attacks almost every single day.
According to Midas Touch, Iran is rejecting Trump's claim that Tehran agreed to hand over its enriched uranium stockpile. A source close to Iran's parliament speaker said no form of nuclear material transfer to America has been negotiated, directly contradicting Trump. So Trump is lying, as usual. Go figure.
So the interpretation and the way this ceasefire was agreed, it's very contentious, especially between Hezbollah and the Speaker's Birri, which is their closest allies, who pushed for that ceasefire agreement. So for them, they don't want to go back to this ceasefire agreement. But just to point out, because I know the rhetoric of the Israeli government always point out that the border is the Litani River, but the Israeli don't have control up the Litani River. And now they have maybe in some areas 7 kilometers or less. We have the main battle in Bint Jbeil, which is still contested.
Yeah, Midas is good, Linda.
Even the Israeli military.
You're up at 3:45 a.m.? What are you doing up so early?
Control all of the Litani River, which is impossible to do without the big.
Are you a vampire?
They won't be able to eliminate Hezbollah at this rate, nor to stop the rocket launch. So now, what's more dangerous now is we have more mixed area. We have the Israeli controlled some areas, Israeli forces, but they don't have full control. They didn't be able to clear everything from it. So this is going to be a very contested area in the coming 10 days of how both sides going to. The media today, they asked all their fighters to stand where they are, not to launch rockets, not to move. And so we have now a territory. Will the Israeli Lebanese army go in or not? What will happen in the next 10 days? So, but just to point out, they don't have control of south of the Litani River.
Okay, I'd like to examine what has changed as a result of this war, and clearly politically we need to look at that. But Rami, before we do that, we mustn't forget the humanitarian angle of this, and just the fact that well over 2,000 people have been killed in this war. And remarkably, Pakistan, the mediator in the wider conflict between the US and Iran, wanted Lebanon included on April the 8th. And since then, a further at least 570 people have been killed that didn't need to be killed.
Yeah, I don't think it's so remarkable. Pakistan is a very knowledgeable leadership, and they understand how these dynamics work, and they understand why this fighting goes on decade after decade, and therefore they insisted that the Lebanon fighting with Hezbollah and Israel be included to resolve the Iran-U.S.-Israel conflict. That's just pure logic. But the Israelis and Americans didn't want to link them. They wanted to maintain Israeli domination over northern Israel and southern Lebanon. But this has not worked. And this is quite fascinating how Iran and Hezbollah, two supposedly ravaged, obliterated groups, a country and group, have been able to force the U.S. and
Obliterated.
Israel to do a ceasefire that they didn't really want to do. The humanitarian side is a terrible but unfortunate side
What's up,
effect
Mike?
of the fighting. This has been going on for decades and decades in the Middle East, and there's nothing worse than the humanitarian consequences of the American-Israeli genocide.
Yeah, I
in
don't think they're
Gaza,
going to
which the
give it up
Israelis
to
started
Trump.
to repeat in Lebanon with
They're
this
already
blanket
saying that it's not true
destruction,
what Trump is
carpet
saying.
bombing
So
of entire areas and villages. And they wanted
Trump's
to
just
create a
manipulating the
security
market,
zone
man.
in the south,
As usual.
as Joe mentioned. And
Rinse and repeat.
but they can't keep doing this, because for the first time ever, they've encountered serious opposition from Hezbollah and Iran that has forced them to stop doing this. And now we're into the phase of possibly a negotiation to resolve these issues, rather than a unilateral Israeli military, American-supported hegemonic assault that redraws the maps of the Middle East. You have to see this, as my last comment, you have to see this, I think, as the part of the last anti-colonial battle in the Middle East. The Iranians and the Hezbollah and Hamas and others are fighting to stop the century of Western hegemonic military assault and control of this region. And Palestine is the core element there, and it has spread to other parts of
You got to keep throwing that in our face, right, Mike?
A serious attempt to stop
Thanks,
it
buddy.
and to get to a situation where the Israelis can live in their Jewish majority state that the UN has accepted and the Arabs have all accepted in the Arab peace plan, but Israel and the US reject, and to try to stop the military dominance of Israel and the US, and to replace it with some kind of negotiated agreement that is fair to all and that respects international law. But international law was destroyed by the US and Israel while they were carrying out the genocide in Gaza.
Okay, Yossi, I'd like your reading of how this ceasefire has been viewed inside Israel. It seems to have taken the country by surprise, including perhaps the cabinet. Tell us how also it affects the fortunes of Prime Minister Netanyahu. The Middle East is a strange place. Fortunes can change sharply and swiftly.
Things keep going the way they're going,
very
Belinda.
Popular at the start of this war.
Yeah. Let me start to maybe say that I don't subscribe to the opinion that Iran and the Hezbollah are the kind of the knight in shining armor for the Palestinians. Yes, the Palestinian issue should be resolved in a just and fair manner, but to think that Iran and the Hezbollah are doing that and not for their own purposes and interests, I think it's a bit naive. I think that they have their own game about their own survival. If Hezbollah loses relevance if there is no resistance to Israel, and I think actually Israel falling into this trap again and again and again by overreacting disproportionately, using its military power, and doesn't actually look into the wider game in the region. As for what you ask, we know that what happened Israel and under Netanyahu needs always to keep some fronts open. This is what keeps Netanyahu in power. As long as there is conflict, it can be in Gaza, it can be in the West Bank, Iran, Hezbollah, and Lebanon. Not that Israel doesn't have justification that Hezbollah attacks it. It attacked it in 2023, immediately after the Hamas attack. It joined Iran. It's the question how it responds to this and what it takes. It takes actually liberties to inflict this humanitarian tremendous pain on other countries or society. Israel was interested to keep, most of the government was interested in keeping this war with the Hezbollah going. They think that they have a job to finish, whether it's realistic or not. I don't think it's realistic. And it's, again, one of the problems with the Israeli government as it is the only modus operandi is using military power, never translated and know when to stop and when to move to diplomatic sphere. But Netanyahu took this decision despite opposition within the security cabinet, despite what many commentators said, despite what most of the coalition think, despite what people in the north demanded from him. They feel that they were actually being sold out. But reality is Netanyahu, the only person, it's not a country, the only person that Netanyahu fears is Trump. If Trump says stop to the war with Iran, he stops. Stops with Hezbollah, he stops. That's the only break that exists right now when Netanyahu government is, as far as Netanyahu government is concerned.
Let me turn to Joe and let's get a feeling of what you think is going on with regard to the government in Beirut, because you had a new team just over a year ago, a new prime minister, a new president. They said they were going to push Hezbollah to disarm. They tried a little bit, and maybe they had a few little bits of success. Do you think disarmament is a real possibility now?
At this moment, no. We have to see how things will evolve. Now we have the executive branch, which basically took a strategic decision to be closer to the US side on this. And you have Hezbollah, basically, who remains obviously in the Iranian track. And then you have the parliament speaker, Nabih Berri, who's trying to be the balancing act. And he's the most decisive person now in the dynamic. He basically said, we will not negotiate if there's no ceasefire. And this helped the dynamic, whether externally or internally, to reach the ceasefire just after the negotiation. Now the second step, which is to advance more, whether a call between the Israeli Prime Minister and the Lebanese President. And now the line in Lebanon is, we will not arrive to this moment without the Israeli withdrawal from the south. So we are in an impasse since a while, but now it's more clear. The Israeli cannot end Hezbollah's threat militarily. Hezbollah cannot liberate south of Lebanon militarily. And you have still in the Iranian-US impasse somehow. So the path now becomes increasingly clear is you have to have a negotiated settlement. But
okay,
because you eat a lot less processed crap than we do.
So you have to have a negotiated settlement. Clearly, Yossi has said that the only person Netanyahu listens to is Trump. How worried are you that Trump might move on and not really keep his interest in this? For example, the Gaza ceasefire was October last year, 6 months ago. 3 months ago, we were told it was moving to phase 2. The thing seems not to be a priority for the administration. Are you worried Lebanon might go the same way?
Oh, for sure. Trump has a very short attention span and an even shorter repository of actual knowledge about the region. He doesn't really know Lebanon, Palestine, Israel, Iran. His knowledge is very, very limited. He basically reacts
his knowledge of everything is very limited.
And to the right-wing groups that support him, including the Christian Zionists who are very pro-Israeli, and the people who help fund his elections. So he's not a very serious practitioner of Middle East diplomacy. He's into it now because of the Iran situation, which Netanyahu got him to get involved in by launching that war. But yes, Trump could just say, oh, I've had enough of this. These people have been fighting for 3,000 years. No, they haven't been fighting for 3,000 years. They've been fighting since the British Balfour Declaration of 1917 promised the Jewish homeland in a land that was 93% Palestinian, and then the Israeli state was created in 1948. Yeah. They've been fighting since then, and until that conflict is resolved, they're going to keep fighting. As are most
all
of
we
the
eat over here is processed crap.
So a diplomatic resolution.
That's why we're all fat and disgusting.
Faster if the United States is involved in it, and we saw several times now where the U.S. pushed Netanyahu for a ceasefire in Gaza a year ago. It didn't last very long, wasn't serious. Ceasefire in Lebanon now, ceasefire in Iran.
So okay, Rami.
Somehow.
Rami, thank you very much. Rami Khouri, Joe Macron and Yossi Meckelberg are our guests today on Inside Story. Al Jazeera's teams in Beirut and southern Lebanon will continue to cover this story with plenty more analysis at aljazeera.com. Your views are welcome as ever. On Facebook, share your thoughts at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story or post on X. Our username is @AJ Inside Story. For now, that's it from me, James Bays, and the production team here. But Al Jazeera's coverage never stops. Stay tuned
It is
for the
cheaper.
latest.
All right, guys, don't go anywhere. I got to run an ad. I'll be right back.
Can you really bomb a political future into existence?
I don't think that's what we're trying to do. I think the objective here is to destroy the instruments of Iranian state power.
Let me ask you this directly. Is Israel effectively leading U.S. foreign policy?
They want to do a Gaza-like effort on the main power centers in Iran to kill thousands of people, not just the core.
Upfront tackles the big issues, only on Al Jazeera.
A group of activists from Puerto Rico arrive at the Salvador Allende Hospital in Havana, bringing gifts in the form of badly needed medical supplies. They say they brought what they could in suitcases.
The donations include needles for injecting insulin, the insulin itself, antibiotics, prednisona for acute allergies, medicine for asthma as well, which this country has almost run out of. It is a heartwarming donation, there's no doubt about that.
Since the Trump administration imposed a total fuel blockade on Cuba more than 3 months ago, an already dire economic situation has become desperate. Jeremy Corbyn is also here to say that Cuba is not alone.
It is an obsession by Trump, there's no question about that. Every time he's asked a question, he then goes on saying, I will take Cuba. And as was pointed out earlier, in the way that Theodore Roosevelt took Panama, I don't think it's going to happen because I don't think the rest of the world will allow it.
Hello, I'm Foli Batibo, live in Doha with Al Jazeera's extensive coverage of the ceasefires in Iran and Lebanon. Coming up, Iran says the Strait of Hormuz is completely open to commercial ships for the remainder of the ceasefire. President Trump has reacted with a flurry of social media posts.
All right, one more hour to go,
US
guys.
blockade of Iranian ports
And I'm
will
done for today.
remain in place. In
Thank you all for
Lebanon,
coming.
thousands of people displaced by Israeli attacks return home as a 10-day ceasefire begins.
No,
Lebanon's
Carl, it is not
president
over.
says any peace deal will not undermine national rights or cede territory after Donald Trump barred Israel from further bombing.
Plus, the race for the US and Iran to reach a deal. On This Is America, we'll
You're
look at
good,
the
Mike.
pressure pushing the
You guys are free to
long-time
talk about
adversaries
whatever
to
you
find
want.
a diplomatic
You don't have to
exit
derail into
before a
anything.
fragile ceasefire expires.
Iran says it's fully reopened the Strait of Hormuz to commercial vessels. It comes after a 10-day ceasefire in Lebanon took effect. Tehran had asked for that as part of its truce with the U.S. On social media, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said ships transiting the strait would take a route designated by Iran's maritime authorities. President Donald Trump has welcomed the news, but he says the U.S. naval blockade on Iran will remain in full force as talks to end the war continue. Trump says a final deal is mostly complete. A 2-week ceasefire between Washington and Tehran is
Get
due
some
to
sleep,
end
Belinda.
on Wednesday. Now let's show you the live map of the Strait of Hormuz. This picture right now in the strait, the red dots and arrows you can see are oil tankers. Those in green are other commercial vessels. Marine traffic data indicates an Iranian-flagged oil tanker and a bulk cargo ship crossed the strait soon after Tehran's announcement. Around a fifth of global oil supplies are normally transported through the waterway. It's been largely closed since the start of the Iran conflict nearly 7 weeks ago, leaving hundreds of vessels stranded. Now, Al Jazeera's Ali Hashem is standing by in Tehran, but first let's go to our chief U.S. correspondent, Alan Fisher, at the White House. Alan, so President Trump announcing a number of things in the last
Thank you,
few
Belinda.
hours.
Appreciate it.
Bring us up to speed with what he said and what this indicates as far as the negotiations?
Well, he believes that they're very close to a deal. He thinks something can be done in the next few days. He hasn't detailed anyone to head to Pakistan at this point, although he has talked about how he trusts the Pakistani mediators. He believes that the United States has got everything that they were asking for. He says that Iran has agreed to no nuclear weapons, essentially in perpetuity. He's talked about recovering nuclear dust. That would be the enriched uranium, which is buried under the atomic sites that were targeted in Operation Midnight Hammer in the summer. He talked about the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, said that was important, that there will be no money given to Iran from the United States. That would essentially say that the money that's frozen here in the US, believed to be around $20 billion, will stay here. He thinks that there's room for talks. He hasn't decided what the team will be. He likes J.D. Vance, but didn't say that he would be asked to head there. So a lot of things
he doesn't like J.D. Vance.
That there's momentum. But of course, any runner will tell you if you're running a marathon, the hardest part is the last kilometre. So they may have tentative agreement, but that's why you get teams of experts involved in this. They sit down and work out the technicalities of it all. Is it possible? In the meantime, the ceasefire holds, but so does the military blockade of Iranian ports. Now, Donald Trump says that that is working well. He believes it's a very good pressure tactic. He thinks it is focusing Iranian attention on coming up with a deal. So he has got no intention of moving that for the time being. The Navy tell us that it's all about blockading ships coming in and out of Iranian ports, that they've already turned back a couple of tankers headed back to Iran. And so he's going to keep that in place for the time being. He also said just 24 hours ago that he believes a deal could be done in the next couple of days. What he's been doing on social media this morning is not just building up momentum towards that, but building up expectation. And people are now hoping that Donald Trump will be able to deliver what he's been promising.
Lots of expectations, no doubt. Thank you very much, Alan, for that. Alan Fisher, Chief U.S. Correspondent there at the White House. Let's bring in Ali Hashim in Tehran. Lots of claims, as Alan said there, by President Trump on what Iran has agreed on. What are Iranian officials saying?
Well, the latest I've seen, aside from what sources told us, which we'll come to later, I'm reading now a tweet by the President's Assistant for Communication and Information, Mahdi Tabatabai. He says, the Twitter rhetoric and baseless statements of the enemy are aimed at stripping the Iranian nation of their sense of pride for the great victories they have achieved through their resolute defense. The conditional and limited reopening, once again, we are seeing now this new narrative circulating. Iranians are saying that the Strait of Hormuz is limited and conditional.
MAGA are nothing but fools and idiots.
So the conditional and limited
What
reopening
did P.T. Barnum say? There's a sucker born every minute.
Solely an Iranian initiative, one that creates responsibility and serves to test the firm commitments of the opposing side. If they continue with their promises, they will face. If they stop continuing with their promises, they will face dire consequences. So this is a spokesperson from the presidency, said Mahdi Tabatabai. Aside from that, Mr. Bakhari, the spokesperson for the foreign ministry, also mentioned that the Strait of Hormuz is opened within Iranian supervision, and whoever wants to pass from there, any vessel, any tanker wants to pass from there, should coordinate with the appropriate Iranian authority. He means the armed forces. Aside from that, in response to what President Trump said about an agreement with Iran on stopping its nuclear program, handing over its enriched uranium, and Iranian
this is far from over, Mike. We got a long way to go. Prices are going to be high for a long time.
Is to put together a framework based on the 10 points that Iran presented when the talks for ceasefire started. So now, what is going to be...
Well, if there's one thing MAGA has, Belinda, it's a lack of knowledge.
Not an agreement. The framework would put together a group of points that both sides will have to agree on. So if it's the enrichment issue, Iran has its own offer, the United States has its own proposal, then they will have to agree on this. Regarding the highly enriched uranium, Iran is proposing to have these quantities diluted into lesser percentages towards 1% or 1.5% here inside Iran, whereas they can be used
That's terrible,
in
Melinda.
the Tehran nuclear facility. The Americans want to take the whole
No, Eric,
quantity.
it did not.
There are several ideas here.
You're talking about the
being
futures price. That
discussed.
doesn't
So
mean
the
anything.
main issue is that
Look up the
putting
physical price
together
of Brent
all
crude
these
right now.
points that
It's about
should be
$140 a
agreed
barrel.
upon, and from there on, it's
That's
something
the price
similar
to pay
what
attention
happened
to,
in 2013,
not the futures price.
Before the 2015 deal. Imagine it took 2 years to agree on a full agreement.
Right.
So this is the issue right now, and this is what the Iranians are talking.
Lots of details still needing to be ironed out. Ali Hashim in Tehran, thank you very much for that. Let me now bring in our correspondent, Osama bin Javed, who's covered extensively the talks between Iran and
you guys are running out of
Washington
petrol, right?
in Islamabad last
Belinda?
week that led to the ceasefire that is now in place. Pakistan, of course, played a pivotal role in achieving that truce. What are we hearing from the Pakistanis about what might happen in the next few days, given, as Alan said, the expectations that seem to be building?
Absolutely, Folly. So we've been seeing the slow movement of diplomacy in the last 6 weeks. It became public in the last 48 hours. And now we're hearing from some sources who are privy to information, as soon as there was a ceasefire in Lebanon and then the Strait of Hormuz reaction came from Iran, I asked somebody and they told me that it was only done because of, quote, relentless efforts by the Pakistani military chief in Tehran. He stayed for 2 days, which was longer than expected, and he met everybody who is in the political, diplomatic and military circles. I was told by the source that just the sheer expression of coming out in public places with the Pakistani army chief was essentially to give an idea.
It's so weird.
That there's a lot
You all over there being asked to work from home, and over here we're trying to get people out of their homes and back into the offices and the cubicles.
What they're trying to do is build trust. One diplomatic source told us that no leaks have come from Pakistan, and that is a great feat coming from all of the various aspects of governance in Pakistan. And that is why, so far, what we know is that now it is a different gear of diplomacy that the situation is in. You're expecting 24 to 48 hours, and major developments are happening.
I was going to ask you if we were going to see any movements in Islamabad in the coming days.
There's been a number of high-profile meetings in Islamabad on various aspects of this, whether it's the media, its delegates, its security. There is a lot of movement that is happening right now. We've been given information that as early as Sunday, there could be some pre-arrivals of people close to the negotiations, and then obviously it will depend on
it's got to be
the two
very bad
sides
for families.
when they're ready to send their own people. From the Iranian side, there's been a lot of confidence that they, if you can call it that, towards J.D. Vance. They don't want to see Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, who they feel would betrayed them when we were in Geneva. And there is also not a lot of trust in Donald Trump himself, because many Iranians see him as somebody who not just killed the supreme leader, but gloated about it as well.
Right. Interesting to see what happens in Pakistan in the next few days. Osama bin Javed, thank you very much for joining us. Now, meanwhile, in Lebanon, thousands of people displaced by the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah have been heading south after a U.S.-brokered ceasefire came into effect. Many are returning to find their homes destroyed. Al Jazeera's Zena Khoda reports from Nabatea in southern Lebanon.
Destruction in the south. Huwaida returned to find her home in ruins. In the south, Huwaida returned to find her home in ruins, like many other Lebanese people. They've returned after the U.S. brokered a temporary 10-day truce with Israel. Nabatea was among the areas Israeli forces repeatedly targeted with strikes during 46 days of conflict. Some didn't have time to escape.
No one really knows if this ceasefire will hold. You just can't be sure, because you can't trust Israel and the United States.
Their return, even with the uncertainty about what comes next, is being framed as a victory. Many of the more than 1.2 million people displaced across Lebanon support Hezbollah. Families were holding pictures of their sons, husbands, brothers who fought the Israeli military as they invaded
You're a
southern
lucky man,
Lebanon.
Mike.
The Israeli military hasn't withdrawn, and it has advised residents
Good
not
for
to
you,
return
Belinda.
to villages close to the border. This is a temporary truce dependent on progress in negotiations between Lebanon and Israel, dependent on the Lebanese government's ability to assert its sovereignty, conditions that will not be easy to achieve. Hezbollah is still active in southern Lebanon, and it is refusing to cooperate with the government and disarm. Any move against the group could worsen internal tensions. Israel failed in its objective to destroy Hezbollah. It is tied to Lebanon's Shia Muslim community, people who have little faith in a state that is now negotiating with an enemy. Israel has killed more than 2,000 people, including women and children. It even targeted health centers and medical workers. Nearly
Of course it
100
did.
of them
Look at
were
this
killed
mess.
in deliberate attacks.
We have been targeted by airstrikes, sometimes double-top strikes. They hit us while helping those targeted. We work under stress, knowing we can be killed anytime. but
Bibi needs to be
never stop.
arrested.
There's anger for people here in the south. Negotiations can't lead to normalization or peace. They want Israel to abandon its occupation of Lebanese land.
It's plenty of years worth of work, worth of hard work, worth of money, worth of sweat, just gone in a blink of an eye. Because this is Israel. That's how it is.
The truce allows Israel to act against what it says is a security threat without it constituting a violation, similar to the 2024 ceasefire. Hezbollah says this time
You invaded
it will
another
respond.
country.
But here, talk of diplomacy, talk of peace is not what is on people's minds. They are trying to absorb their tragedy. Zena Khuder, Al Jazeera,
Yeah,
Nabatieh,
I
Southern
agree, Mike.
Lebanon.
We're blowing up houses.
Meanwhile, Lebanon's president has said his country can no longer be considered
Israel
an
is,
arena for anyone's
with our
wars.
money and our
In a televised address,
arms.
Joseph Aoun said his government's negotiations with Israel this week were not a sign of weakness.
Pain cannot remain our destiny, and I pledge that we will not reach any agreement that may undermine our established rights or harm the dignity of our steadfast people, or give up a grain of soil of our homeland. Our objective is clear: to put an end to the Israeli aggression on our people and our homeland, the total withdrawal of the Israelis, for our authority to prevail, and the return of all Lebanese with dignity and freedom.
Let's bring in Malcolm Webb in Beirut for us. Malcolm, why did President Aoun feel the need to defend his government's ceasefire deal with Israel, and how is his statement being received in Lebanon?
Well, the ceasefire has been widely welcomed. There's certainly been a lot of criticism from some parts of Lebanese society of the government for engaging in direct talks with Israel, from Hezbollah, from its supporters, from many people, particularly across the south, who feel that the government simply doesn't have a hand to play and it shouldn't be negotiating with an invader who's still occupying parts of the country. And so Aoun's speech appeared to try to address some of their concerns. He said he wanted Israeli troops to withdraw. Now, it's not clear if or how he could achieve that, but that's something that Hezbollah has always said is necessary, and that's certainly something that would be needed for the people who've been displaced from those villages along the border in that what Israel calls a security zone up to about 10 kilometers inside southern Lebanon. It's one of the things that those people would need to be able to go home, although of course the Israeli military has carried out systematic demolition in some of those villages. So even if people ever do get the chance to
That's my favorite part of the Bible.
To piles of rubble.
And Malcolm, is Iran announcing the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz and President Trump's pledge that Israel will not bomb Lebanon? Is that giving hope to people there that the ceasefire might last?
Well, people here, many of them, I mean, thousands have tried to return home, as we saw in Zaina's story, but many more are waiting. This ceasefire was meant to last for 10 days. Hezbollah said that people should be patient. They need to see what's going to happen. We were in a displacement center earlier. People there said they were optimistic, but they were going to wait. There's a deep mistrust among many people, particularly in the south, of Israel, of the United States. And Iran's opening of the Strait of Hormuz, if that does lead to a resumption of something like normal shipping, and if that does reduce the pressure on the economic pressure internationally, the big question will be if the US keeps up the pressure that it's asserted on Israel.
It may have been AI, Mike, because Hegseth admitted to using AI at the beginning of the war.
Question of if Israeli troops will withdraw
That was
from
a
the
stupid
occupied
move, too.
territories in the south or not.
Al Jazeera's Malcolm Webb reporting there live from Beirut. Malcolm, thank you.
Okay, Belinda. You should really get some sleep.
All right, more now on Iran's
We only have 40
announcement that
minutes
it's
left.
fully reopened the Strait of Hormuz. On this live tracker that you're going to see now, the red dots and arrows, hopefully you can see it. You can see the live tracker. The red dots are oil tankers. The green are other commercial vessels. Marine traffic data indicates an Iranian-flagged oil tanker and a bulk cargo ship crossed the strait soon after Tehran's announcement. To discuss this and all the latest developments in this ceasefire, I'm now joined by Abdullah Bandar Al-Taibi, Assistant Professor of International Affairs at Qatar University, and Alexandru Hudeshtanu, who's a military analyst with expertise in maritime security. Gentlemen, thank you both for joining us on Al Jazeera.
It is ludicrous.
Alexandru, let me start with you. I know you've been
AI
keeping an
gets
eye
shit
on
wrong
that
all the
live
time.
tracker for the last few hours. How
It
many ships
hallucinates.
have crossed Hormuz since Iran's
It's definitely not ready for
Is
prime
traffic
time.
going back to where it was
For wartime.
prior to February 28th?
I don't think traffic will go back to prior of the war.
Skynet
right
is
now,
not
but
ready.
I've seen already there's signs of ships lining up towards passing the straits on both sides, especially from inside the Gulf towards the eastbound traffic. There are, I would say, roughly 20 plus cargo ships and maybe 5 tankers which are lined up towards trying to pass the strait. It's an interesting development. I'm assuming in the next 3 to 5 hours, some of these ships will reach Larak Island, and we'll see if they will pass or not.
But Donald Trump has said that the blockade is still in place, but that blockade is only specifically targeting Iranian vessels?
It's
from what you understand?
targeting vessels that call Iranian ports, and Iranian connected vessel. Also, CENTCOM issued a list of smuggling specific items. Most of them had to do with military equipment or military precursors.
But there are reports that several Iranian vessels actually slipped through this blockade. Has it actually completely cut off Iran's oil shipments, this blockade? Has it worked?
In my observation, I think those ships end up being turned back somewhere along the Pakistani waters once they exit the Iranian area of responsibility. I would not be surprised if some ships will pass from Iran, and this will be seen as a sign of goodwill on the U.S. side as well, because we have to understand that this opening of Hormuz Strait is still under the control. It's still a pressure lever of Iran.
Professor Al-Taibi, how are Gulf capitals receiving this news that the Strait of Hormuz is reopened, even albeit under different arrangements? Is this welcome news?
Well, that's a good sign. I mean, this means the Iranians are accepting the reality that this is not helping them, and this is not helping the region and the world as well. And this is a good thing. However, we should keep in mind that there are 2 layers of blockade to the region here. There is the Iranian one inside, and there is the American one outside. And who's controlling now the whole thing is the Americans and not the Iranians. And this is something important. I think the Iranians, the announcement of Arakji today is a symbolic way of putting things, of framing things in a way that Iran is still in control, and they actually letting all the ships to go through. And this is just to show that Iranians are still in control of everything.
Right. Well, why do you think Iran has softened its position on the question of the Strait of Hormuz? With this announcement, it would seem at least they have. This was their biggest bargaining chip. Why do you think they've done this now?
Well, I think that...
I mean,
Let
obviously
it
they
rip,
mentioned
Mike.
the
Let it
Lebanese
rip.
ceasefire, but are there other motivations behind this announcement? You think?
I'm sure Trump would be happy with it.
The American blockade is blocking...
As long as it was blue
all the
cities
ships
and
going
blue
to China, and
states.
this is affecting China significantly. We talk about 45% of oil goes to China, and this is a big thing. As well as U.S. announced they have military cooperation with Indonesia, and this is very close to the Strait of Malacca as well. And just imagine copying this behavior of the Iranians in Strait of Hormuz there as well. This would block 80% of the oil that goes to China. So I think It's more or less the American administration, they just did a good job by changing the Chinese calculations, the gains and the losses, by advancing the idea that what is happening in the Strait of Hormuz should be harming the Chinese for them to act in pressure on Iran to soften their position.
Alexander, do you agree with that, that China has a role here in Iran softening its position on the Strait of Hormuz?
Probably yes, but I tend to stay closer
She's
to
around
home,
somewhere,
and the
Jimmy.
blockade that U.S. enforced against Iranian or ships that called Iranian ports for sure put pressure on Iran. Iran was fairly free to use the strait while it was blockading for everybody else. So at this point, there was a leverage that U.S. pulled under the ceasefire agreement, because the blockade against the Iranian shipments is still not breaking the understanding of the ceasefire that was set in place for these negotiations to happen.
Now,
What's up,
President
Belinda?
Trump, Professor
Welcome
Al-Otaibi
back.
also made a
Thank
number
you.
of announcements in addition to saying that the blockade on the Strait of Hormuz was still open, notably on Iran's nuclear program, claiming that Iran had agreed to abandon uranium enrichment, which the Iranians have not reacted to. Some have denied, it would seem, judging from what our correspondent said there. What do you make of these statements and announcement that President Trump has made as we are expecting the talks and negotiations to continue in Islamabad? What does it suggest about where those negotiations are headed?
Well, that's a good question for Oli, actually. When it comes to Trump, I think he never leaves things behind closed doors. So he's bringing this up to show that he has a better deal than Obama 11 years ago. This is number one. And Iranians would definitely react by denying this, because they don't want to show as powerless in front of their people internally. So this is a major thing. He also mentioned that he wants to travel to Islamabad.
Right.
And that
he
means
said he may travel to
that means
Islamabad.
he is looking
Thank you,
forward
Belinda. I
to
appreciate
a
it.
better deal, a good deal.
I'm glad you're
Iranian
enjoying it.
Announcement of handing over the uranium and all that nuclear goals. Then he will go there to take a photo and to enjoy and celebrate.
Are you subscribed, Belinda?
That's a big achievement. But how this will
Are you
affect,
all
I think
subscribed?
it's too early.
Mike,
we just
Jimmy?
had one round. There is a problem of trust on the table between both parties. I think we're heading to a second round, possibly by Monday. And then I think we should keep, the parties should keep pushing for more and more talks, because this is very important. And this is also a good sign that ceasefire will be extended, because if we link it with the Lebanese issue, it's 10 days. And that means we're going to have possibly an extension of
Do you see the ceasefire being extended, or do you see them perhaps agreeing to a sort of framework where there's been talk about a memorandum of understanding between the two sides, which would then lead to more negotiations later on?
For sure, it needs to have a framework for this whole distrust to be built back into trust in the region, and especially for the maritime shipping to take
Thank you,
course
Belinda.
back. So yeah, I would see a ceasefire extension, because I do not think they will reach this framework under these short terms.
Don't make your son mad, though. Subscribing to this channel on his login.
Agreed on, and some of the negotiables.
What do you think is the red line on Iran's nuclear program? I mean, Donald Trump is making all these announcements suggesting that Iran is basically giving up its nuclear activities completely.
It's not giving up anything.
I think
Come
for
on.
Iran, the non-negotiables, the red lines will be regime survival, which at this point is understood as such from the U.S. side. Lifting of all the sanctions in the past 47 plus years, layers upon layers of sanction, and I think this would be their biggest gain. And I think a form of less control overall after these deals are achieved. So I'm not sure exactly what that leads into their nuclear program. Most likely, they will still want to have some form of liberty to pursue some form of nuclear program, maybe sometimes later on in a capacity of such. But for sure, these are non-negotiables for them, the sanctions and the...
Professor Al-Otaibi, Gulf capitals, of course, bore the brunt of this conflict. What kind of a deal would they like to see come out of all of this between the Americans and Iranians? One that keeps this regime in place and stronger than it was before, or one where perhaps it is not as strong as it was prior to this conflict?
I don't think the region expects a lot from these talks, to be honest. They think it's better to have de-escalation and end to this war. Then I think the region should have their own framework with Iran. This could be regional, within the region, or could be under the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, since it belongs to like all the countries here. They belong and they have memberships there. Then they need to have talks about regional influence. They need to have talks about the attacks, and they have to build up a case, a stronger case.
But are all the countries in the region on the same page as to what kind of a relationship they want to have with Iran after this conflict?
No, I don't think so. That's a good question, Foley, and this is very important. I don't think things will be different because the regime, it all depends on the regime. If the regime survives, as it is, the regime's surviving. And how the regime will look
Mike,
like, this is a big question.
What are you doing to me, man? I'm trying to lose weight.
Conflict inside the regime between the IRGC
You're making me hungry.
and the president on all those civilian representation. And this is going to affect Iran and how it looks at the region generally. So I think the region will, they don't expect a lot from the US at this time. They just expect an end to this war, because this war is just bringing a lot of chaos in the region. But I think that as for the next step in the future, there definitely will be a framework, I think, regionally to solve the problems of the Strait of Hormuz, for example, and the regional influence, and also the Iranian attacks.
Briefly, Alexandra, how will Iran come out of this conflict, and what would the regional countries, same question as I put to the professor, what would they like to see come out of this agreement as far as they're concerned?
I cannot talk in the name of the region, but usually this type of situation are never solved unless the region is involved in the solving itself. So some form of multilateral framework should be probably in place after all this.
Okay, and so what about Iran? How do you see them coming out of this?
I don't think they will come out stronger than they were before. For sure, the deals that we see now happening are showing that Iran has been pushed to the negotiation table quite fast, given the size of the war compared to other wars. And some concessions have been made. And if the nuclear deal goes in the way of Trump administration, then that will be a strong signal that the
you have too much time on your hands, Mike.
Their hands stronger than the Iranian.
It'll be interesting to see what comes out the next few days and whether the negotiations in Islamabad lead to a concrete agreement. Thank you both very much for joining us on Al Jazeera. Abdullah Bandar Al-Tabi, Assistant Professor at the Qatar University.
All right, guys, hang on. Don't go anywhere. I got to insert an ad.
Security expert.
Be right back.
Here on Al Jazeera. Now, a reminder of our top stories this hour. Iran says it's fully reopened the Strait of Hormuz to commercial vessels. The decision is tied to a new 10-day ceasefire in Lebanon, which Tehran had asked for as part of its truce with the U.S. Iran says ships crossing the Strait of Hormuz will take a route designated by its maritime authorities. U.S. President Donald Trump has welcomed the announcement, but he says a U.S. naval blockade of the strait will remain in full force until Iran reaches a deal with Washington. And Lebanon's president says his country can no longer be considered an arena for anyone's wars a day after a ceasefire in Israel's conflict with Hezbollah took effect. In a televised address, Joseph Aoun said his government's negotiations with Israel this week were not a sign of weakness. All right, I'll hand it over now to Al Jazeera's team in Washington, D.C. for our regular segment from the U.S. Capitol. This is America, bringing you deeper insight into the debates shaping America and the world.
All right, everyone, half hour left.
People are growing restless for the conflict with Iran to come to an end. As Tehran says it's reopening Hormuz, the U.S. and Iran are racing toward a deal. I'll be back with more on what Americans think, but first, here's Anna Burns-Francis in our Washington studio.
Thanks, Heidi. Iran and America are still at war, but with just a few days left until the ceasefire expires, what or who will decide whether hostilities resume? Joining us in a moment, Chief U.S. Correspondent Alan Fisher is at the White House and Manny Rapallo is at the State Department today. Right from the start, U.S. President Donald Trump has been overwhelmingly optimistic about America's success, declaring the war over, nearly over, or won more than 12 times so far.
I don't want to be a wise guy. I don't want to speak too soon. But
well, he sounds like shit.
You notice that we're doing very well, and I will say the war in Iran is going
Are we back
along
from the ads yet?
swimmingly. I said
I don't see them.
For 2 months, and you know
Someone
what?
let me
We're
know.
gonna have
Mike Belinda?
victory very shortly, and against a very tough, smart country. These people were fighters.
But those fighters have put up a bit more of a fight than many in the administration appear to have expected. Blocking the Strait of Hormuz immediately extended the conflict and the chance of a peace deal. And Iran's made it very clear it's not going to have its arm twisted.
You pay for premium? I pay for premium.
If the American side proposes a package and expects Iran
Or do you
to
just
accept
use an
it
ad
in full,
blocker?
they know that this is not viable. It's also completely at odds with the logic behind negotiations.
At the very least, it seems sparring over the Strait of Hormuz could be over, with the US president announcing Iran has agreed to
It's all
open
good,
it.
Mike. You do what's best for you.
Who now holds the upper hand when it comes to calling an end to the war? Each side is facing similar competing pressures at home to reach a deal. President Trump needs to shift public opinion on the unpopular war ahead of November's midterm elections. He needs to avoid Republicans losing control
You're going
of both
hardcore,
the House
Mike.
and Senate.
You really don't
The
want to see
rising
those
cost of living
ads.
is also a major issue for voters. Trump promised to bring down fuel and grocery prices, but the war
Right,
has
Belinda?
forced both of those to go up. And the mounting cost can't be counted in just dollars. US
Belinda, did you
soldiers
see
have
ads?
already been killed or wounded, and that number could rise if the war resumes. Meanwhile, Iran's most immediate concern post-war will be rebuilding its destroyed infrastructure. Tens of billions of dollars worth of damage has been caused by American and Israeli strikes, which will take years to repair. Tehran also needs to rebuild relationships with its
Did you see
neighbors.
just one?
Ties have been strained
Multiple?
as Iran responded to US strikes.
How long
by
do you think they
firing
lasted? A
drones and
minute
missiles
total?
towards
Couple
the Gulf.
minutes?
And like America, Iranians are also concerned
Just
about
give
the
me an
cost of
estimate, a
living.
guess.
There were months of protests before the war, and a deal with the US could lift and revitalize its economy. For more on this, we're joined now by Manny Rapallo at the State Department and Alan Fisher at the White House. Alan, we'll come to you first. What's
Yeah, I
really
used to run
influencing
an ad
Donald
blocker on
Trump to
YouTube
get
too.
a deal
Now I just pay for the
Well, a
premium.
number of things can be true at the same time. One of them is
Couple
the fact
minutes?
that he would like
Okay.
to see Iran have
Thank
no
you,
nuclear
Belinda.
weapons. He's talked about it since 2016. He's campaigned about it during his 3 presidential election campaigns. He believes that that is the bottom line for him, that there is no nuclear program in Iran. He also wants to make sure that they can't fund proxies that have attacked their neighbors and also the United States over many, many years. He wants to make sure that
how's he
the
gonna make sure of that?
administration in Tehran doesn't think that that is one of their prime concerns.
Welcome,
And then he's got
Trevor,
domestic
to the
concerns as
last
well.
half hour.
He wants to be the president who brought an end to the war in Iran. Remember, he campaigned on no stupid foreign wars in the Middle East, no more forever wars. He doesn't want this to drag on. He doesn't want tagged with that. His team knew that that could be a problem when they initially talked about launching an attack on Iran, but they were confident they'd be able to spin it to the American people. But one thing they haven't been able to spin is the financial impact that many people have felt. Cost of living is much more expensive. Basic things are much more expensive. He needs to convince them that this really is, as he has often said, just short-term pain for long-term gain of a no nuclear Iran and cheaper prices in the long run.
All right, Manny, I'll bring you in here because there is, of course, a third party involved in this conflict, that is Israel. How is the US exerting pressure on Israel to get a deal done?
Well, you can stop giving them my tax dollars.
And the focus from Washington right now is to get this deal, and there's a lot of optimism over that scenario right now. But to reach that point of a deal, the U.S. has to ensure that there isn't going to be any spillover, and that is where we're seeing the pressure from the United States on Israel starting to take shape. Now, just on Thursday, the State Department issued a statement regarding that U.S. brokered agreement, understanding between Israel and Lebanon to create that 10-day ceasefire that would open up a space for broader negotiations. And that in itself is a signal that Washington is actively trying to pressure Israel to not carry out any military operations, particularly along the Lebanese border, and avoid any sort of anything that could derail U.S. talks with Iran. Meanwhile, Washington is still putting heavy pressure on Iran. So in short, what we're seeing is the United States trying to pressure both sides, continue to pressure Iran while also sort of gently nudging Israel not to escalate here. So again, there's a lot of optimism, especially among U.S. Diplomats here over the potential window for a diplomatic outcome, but it is still a window. But that's part of the reason why we're seeing so much urgency to secure a deal right now.
Manny Laparo joining us from the State Department and Alan Fisher at the White House. Thank you both.
Yes, she
Fragile
does,
ceasefire
Belinda.
between the United States and Iran is ticking down. But while plans are being made for more talks, there are questions about what each side actually wants and how much influence Israel has behind the scenes. John Holman looks at whether a deal is really within reach.
President Trump might have thought victory over Iran would be a quick knockout.
Oh, bastards.
With very smart players.
And Iran, which has been playing the game since the 7th century, has always seemed to move ahead. Closing the Hormuz, widening the conflict by attacking Gulf states. But now both sides are looking for a way out. And the clock's running. Only days remain of a fragile ceasefire. The US has made two big moves. The first, blockading Iranian oil, hoping to gain the advantage in the ongoing talks. But also announcing a 10-day ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon. Iran had demanded it as a prerequisite for any deal. Both sides probably now realise that there's no checkmate in this game, and as they inch their way towards the second round of negotiations, they'll both know that they have to make concessions if they want to bring this to a close. The US has hinted it could also lift sanctions, but its chief demand hasn't budged. No nukes.
He said if you guys commit to not having a nuclear weapon, we are going to make Iran thrive. We're going to make it economically prosperous.
Iran, according to the US president, has now pledged not to have nuclear weapons for more than 20 years. It's also made another big concession, saying it's opening Hormuz for as long as the ceasefire lasts, although Trump says the US will maintain its blockade for now. Meanwhile, the rest of the world is looking on, hoping that this chess match is now in its endgame. And that the biggest oil disruption in history
That's hilarious.
can be brought to a close. John Holman, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Meanwhile, public opinion on the war continues to sour amongst Americans. Heidi Jo Castro went to take the temperature from a protest in downtown Washington, D.C.
These demonstrators have gathered at the U.S. Capitol to call for an end to the war with Iran. They say they're people of faith and Christians who want a permanent ceasefire. Is Trump really sincere about wanting a deal to end this war with Iran?
Is Trump sincere about anything? I don't know. I think he doesn't know.
No.
He just says whatever pops in his head.
Yeah.
He's proven himself repeatedly not to be trusted.
How do you think the threat from Iran should be dealt with?
I'm not even sure that Iran really poses a threat. I think it's a perceived threat. I think that, Iran wants to enrich uranium for civilian purposes.
Do you think a peace deal should include the U.S. having an active role of controlling that strait?
I definitely don't think the U.S. should have part of that control, unless it involves countries adjacent to the straits and includes a broader selection of nations.
Do you trust Israel to keep
It's a
their part of
regional
the deal?
issue. Figure it out.
I am a person of faith, and so I have to have faith that if the right steps are taken at the beginning for diplomacy, that will pay off and that they will act faithfully.
Those protester voices are, of course, just a sliver of the greater American public. But recent poll numbers show that the country as a whole is moving in their direction. The Economist YouGov just published these numbers. 32% of Americans say they support the war with Iran. 55% say they oppose it. 35% approve of the way Donald Trump is handling the situation in Iran. 57% disapprove. And as for how Americans rate Donald Trump's skill at negotiating agreements, well, you see at the top, 22% said excellent, 16% said good, 10% said fair, and the greatest number of people, 43%, said that Trump's negotiation skills are poor. That's not a lot of confidence
He's stupid and he
domestically in
sucks.
the
The art of the
president's
deal.
ability
He
to
bankrupted
bring this
4
war to a
casinos.
conclusive end in a way that benefits Americans.
Yeah, I know, Trevor.
So, Who has the willingness then, and what's the
mad at
driving
everybody.
that will to get back to the negotiating table? To give us their perspective today, we're joined by Mark Ginsberger, former US Ambassador, and Jennifer Gavito, former Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary for Near Eastern Affairs. Thank you both for coming in. Ambassador, I'll start with you. In the latest twist, the Strait of Hormuz has been announced as reopened. Has Iran got one over on the US with this call?
Well, yeah. I think strategically there's malfeasance that has been practiced now at this point in time regarding the Straits, because Iran has been able to prove, as a result of the conflict, that somehow or other the control that it never really had before the war, all of a sudden it could just issue a tweet or some sort of statement and say, guess what, the Straits are now closed again. Well, which boatload of oil is going to want to navigate the Straits,
Sorry, Belinda.
even if the Iranians no longer have a navy.
Oh,
and the
you're going to have to get a new toaster and a bin.
Their blockade will not affect
Who steals
foreign
garbage
flag,
cans?
Vessels.
Bins.
They still have said, at least in the last hour or 2 hours ago,
You
they're
are correct,
still planning
Trevor.
to stop Iranian vessels. We have no clarity at this point in time. And if you were a captain of a ship waiting to traverse the Straits, what would you do knowing your insurance company is not going to let you proceed?
Yeah. So, Jennifer, perhaps a little early to be asking this, but what then do you think Iran gets out of announcing the Strait being reopened?
So I think both Iran and the United States have determined at this point that there are diminishing returns in continuing armed conflict. So for Iran, it gets back to potentially a degree of normalcy. And again, I mean, I absolutely agree with Ambassador Ginsburg in that we don't really know yet what the parameters of this agreement are. It is still possible, and certainly from social media suggests
there are
potentially
15
true
minutes
that Iran
left.
can continue to charge tolls to some degree. So freedom of navigation has not necessarily been restored.
I know, you were working.
Again, I think it is very premature to take stock of what either side wins and gains until we have a bit more clarity. But again, if reports
Everyone
are true
say
that
hi to
Iran will
Charisse.
get sanctions relief,
Yeah, you did make
considerable
it.
sanctions relief out of this deal, then they are back in a situation where they can
Hey, I changed the
restock
time,
their
Charisse,
arsenal,
for tomorrow night's
and
live to
have some degree
7:30.
of economic flexibility that they
So
didn't
get yourself a
actually have
box of
before this
wine or something, have a few
Ambassador,
glasses,
Jennifer's alluded perhaps
and
then
get ready,
to what the
because we're going to switch things up tomorrow.
motivation might have been. But when
Instead
I
of
first saw
watching the
this news,
news,
I,
I
thought,
have a
oh, why don't you save
whole
that for the
bunch of
negotiating table?
Iranian
And so I'm
Lego
wondering what
videos
you
lined
think
up.
the motivation
We're
was
going to run through
for
them
Iran in
and
announcing
laugh
before we even know of any
and
hard
talk
talks
about them
taking
and pick
place.
on MAGA.
Several
How does that
reasons.
sound?
The Iranians are going to have to engage in what essentially is a way of prying the Gulf states back at least to having normalization of relations with them after the Iranians
Thank you, Belinda.
attacked every one of the Gulf states, civilian as well as
Not
energy
should,
infrastructure.
Charisse.
You know, they
God.
have been on a courting
I'm gonna
phase during the last few years
movie
trying to get
nights,
the
yeah.
Gulf states
Well, it's
to
all
consider
music
Iran
videos.
to be a partner and try to lure
All the
them away
Lego
from
AI
engaging
Iranian
with
music
Israel
videos I
and
could
the
find on
United
YouTube.
States.
Put them all
I
in a
think that
playlist.
has changed. But there's another thing
We're
going on
gonna
here.
play a few, chat a little, play a few more, chat a little,
moderated a panel on Iran
just to
in
switch
the
things
Senate
up.
yesterday, and one of the
news is
issues
getting
that
kind of
came out
boring until we
was
start
clear
dropping bombs again.
is that
So
the IRGC has taken virtually total control of what remains of the Iranian government, and they need the oil revenue in order to maintain some semblance of internal control. And that the fact
And what type
that
of movies
oil
do you like,
revenue has been
Charisse?
stopped as a result of this blockade
Yeah, we're gonna party,
is
Belinda.
far more significant to them than the resumption of the bombing.
I mean, Iran has always relied on
Charisse,
oil
don't
for
say
what, 80%
rom-coms.
of its export income anyway, so it would be relevant to them no matter who was in charge. Why then do you feel, or what do you know then about what difference that makes, the fact that the IRGC is now in charge of the leadership for where it will take talks?
The idea that here in Washington there's
You want a dance party? We can do a
comments coming
dance
out of
party.
This administration, there's been a regime change.
Fair and reasonable people.
I'll pull my chair out of here
Let me tell
and
you
You don't
something.
think that's
For
true?
those of us,
We'll bop
when you
around.
see the son of the Ayatollah and the Speaker of the
I
Parliament,
have pretty good rhythm for an old white
emerging
guy.
as the key power centers, along with the next generals in charge
Comedy's
of
good.
the IRGC. Message to Secretary of Defense.
You have a
Ward
favorite
Hegseth,
comedian?
This is not the type of team that I would consider to be moderate. This is a team that is going to dig in hard because, let's face it, The most important thing that they have, and the most essential requirement, is regime survivability.
It's interesting that you make the note of a warning there, because the Secretary of Defence, Pete Hegseth, is warning Iran that there is an easy way or a hard way ahead.
To the KH leadership and IRGC leadership, we're watching you. Our capabilities are not the same, our military and
Look,
yours.
Sharice, your
Remember,
boyfriend's on the
this
screen.
is not a fair fight. But there is an alternative. As our negotiators have said, you, Iran, can choose a prosperous future, a golden bridge. And we hope that you do for the people of Iran.
So, Jennifer, given the ambassador's comments and the comments there from the Secretary of Defence, how do you think that rhetoric will sit with Iran at this stage?
I think Iran is probably gleeful about this. They are being given a golden opportunity without really giving up a lot. And again, I just want to keep stressing that I do think it's early to make judgments about what this looks like. But potentially, they're walking away with
talk show
no
comedians,
real
Trevor?
deal or no real concessions
Yeah,
on
they're
a
pretty
missile
funny.
program, no concessions on a drone program. Continued possession, and we don't
Carlin
know for
Burr,
how long or
yep.
to what degree, but of enriched uranium. The knowledge that they can shut down global commerce at will, should they deem in the future that they need to.
You watch any
And
comedy
then you've
podcasts
got,
on YouTube?
You know, a U.S. administration
I like Bad Friends.
that is talking about them as if they are a legitimate negotiating partner. And one of the challenges with this relationship over past years is this deficit of trust. The fact that we have not been able to rely on the promises
Yeah, they
that
hammer
the
Trump
Iranian
all the
regime
time.
has made.
John Oliver's very
which is
funny
why, for example, with JCPOA,
on his show
you had such a
on
stringent
HBO.
Leaves open a door to renewed economic activity in ways that we have not seen in a long time, and that really, again, to the ambassador's point, allow the regime to reestablish some credibility at home by virtue of growing the economy again. And so I think, you know, whatever the Secretary of War, Secretary of Defense says about this as far as watching,
Try
you know,
Bad Friends,
these are technical
Charisse.
questions. And
With Bobby
that
Lee and Andrew
oversight,
Santino.
really
Very funny show.
requires a pretty detailed framework that we've seen no evidence is actually being put in place.
To Jennifer's point there, Ambassador, that the leadership is now being regarded by the US administration as legitimate and that these are the people you sit down at the table with, what choice do they have? This is the leadership that is left.
This is, you know, Jennifer could not, you know, her points are so well taken insofar as what Iran walks away with. This regime, in the end, despite the fact that it was pulverized from the air, looks like it's going to survive. There has not been an uprising. Why would the public uprise again and die in the streets because the besieged still have power there and the guns?
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, I'm out of here in like 10 minutes, buddy.
No uprising.
Thanks for stopping by.
The Iranians
Appreciate
do not
it.
control the Gulf. The American people have soured on a war. The president is desperately looking for an off-ramp.
Go for a walk, burn
Israel's
off some
still
calories.
battling Hezbollah. Syria has, no one's ever said anything about Syria yet. And the Gulf states have lost an enormous amount of what I call deterrence power from the Iranians. The Iranians have now been able to prove that with drones and with an occasional ballistic missile, they can wreak havoc on the security. And by the way, we haven't even mentioned the Red Sea and what the Houthis may do.
Yeah, we're trying to stick to one waterway at a time, I think, perhaps. In terms of trying to come to an agreement, it has been a conflict full of barb trading between the two countries. Vice President J.D. Vance, the man seemingly offering an olive branch to
There you go, Mike.
What the president wants to make, he doesn't want to make like a small deal. He wants to make the grand bargain. And what he's
Good night, Mike.
basically offering to Iran is very simple, and frankly, it's something that no president has, I think, has had the ability to offer. He said that if you're willing to act like a normal country, we are willing to treat you economically like a normal country.
J.D. Vance used the words grand bargain there, Jennifer. What do you think grand bargain means?
That remains to be seen. One thing that I will give President Trump
Need
certainly
those calories
is
to
that
bulk
he has
up,
an
Mike.
unorthodox way of executing foreign policy. And so there is a creativity and a flexibility to this administration's positions that allows it to move outside of some of those rigid lines that have defined our policy towards Iran in recent years. That being said, I think it's really important to remember that we characterized last week's negotiations, which lasted 21 hours, as a failure. We're now a week later. JCPOA dealt only with the nuclear issue, and that took years to negotiate. And so when you talk about a grand bargain, I personally am a bit skeptical that that is, in fact, what we're going to get here. The press is reporting that there is a 3-page
You got the guy that almost wrote The Art of the Deal in charge, so.
But 3 pages is not a grand bargain. It does set the stage for future discussions, and I think that is a net positive from this. But a grand bargain would take all of these issues into account that we're talking about, the regional proxies, the Houthis, Hezbollah, what becomes of Syria, how do you protect that? All of these things would be wrapped up in that. And I have not seen yet suggestions that this administration has the staying power to actually negotiate the type of detailed grand bargain that would be needed to fundamentally set this relationship on a different trajectory. That we get a short-term ceasefire extension, that we can go back to some degree of global commerce. That, again, net positive. I think that's good news.
Of all those things that Jennifer just listed there, Ambassador, there is also the issue of Israel's role in this, and where do they sit in any talks or negotiation? How does the US administration maneuver that relationship into any ceasefire or long-term deal?
It's interesting. At the beginning of this conflict, Benjamin Netanyahu seemed to be in the driver's seat. At this point of the conflict, he's in the back of the bus. This administration is so desperate for an exit ramp, it's going to try to put lipstick, so much lipstick on this pig, by declaring that this is a great negotiated victory. Look, there are no moderates in Iran, period. Whatever agreement is reached, the Iranians will find a way to wiggle out of. As long as this regime is in place, it is never going to change its spots when it comes to dealing with Israel, dealing with the restoration of its weapons program, and repressing the poor people of Iran. What has happened here is essentially no one has gained anything. There's been a lot of losses. The Israelis still don't have a strategic victory. The Americans certainly have no strategic victory. The Iranians live to fight another day, and the poor Gulf states are left wondering who is going to be their protector.
Jennifer, then, can I ask you, what is it that the American administration has failed to understand about Iran's perspective here?
I think from moment number one, it underestimated what Iran would define as success. And for Iran, simply surviving this conflict is a strategic win. That's all they had to do. And they have not only done that, but they have deployed the Strait of Hormuz as a weapon in a way that they had never done before. And so I think this administration continues to, again, underestimate, misunderstand. I mean, even the approach to negotiations last week, the points, the 10 points, the 14, 15 points that were talked about were the types of maximalist positions that you would offer to an adversary that you believe had been defeated. Iran did not believe itself to be defeated. It believes itself to be coming out of this conflict in a strategically better position than when it started. And so the negotiations have to reflect that if you're going to get to this grand bargain that Vice President Vance is talking about. And again, to be clear, that would be a positive for everybody if you could achieve it. But you've got to be realistic. And I couldn't agree more. There are no moderates here. If anything, the elimination of the top tier of leadership in the beginning days of this conflict gave way to a harder line regime than what you previously had. And so whatever is agreed to, whatever is stated in social media in the days ahead, I think you have to keep in mind that this regime is being run by the IRGC, which fundamentally remains committed to the destruction of the United States and to Israel, of the elimination of U.S. troops from the Middle East. These positions have not changed. Commitment to the projection of power through the proxies, none of that has changed.
And so, we're yet to see how it may change as well over the coming days.
Absolutely, yeah. But I am quite skeptical.
Yeah, fair enough. Thank you so much, both of you, for coming in. Jennifer Gavito and Mark Gisberg, appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Well, online, there's been a battle.
7:30 p.m. on the east coast of the United States.
The conversation heating up as the end of the ceasefire looms. Alex Baird has this breakdown.
The race for a deal. The host of the DC-based Iran podcast saying both sides want
that's
Trump. Global energy prices and slumping approval
1930
ratings are taking their toll. The president needs
would be the time here.
Win. While in Tehran, leaders are looking for a durable end, but also relief from crippling financial sanctions. Now, on top of that, war damage. For the president, his chickens are finally coming home to roost.
They're willing to do things today that they weren't willing to do 2 months ago.
The White House painting the
Sure,
rosiest
sure,
of
you
pictures.
fucking orange
The stock
loon.
market is good. Oil prices are already coming down and a deal is nearly here. Trump apparently telling the Dutch king and queen this week he wants the war done, he wants it done quickly, and so the pressure has been turned up to the max. A lot of the narrative here is that Iran is terrified of a looming economic catastrophe if sanctions aren't pulled back. And with reports American troops are still streaming into the Gulf, the White House wants videos like these to be front of the Iranian mind. But if you step
The
out of that
American
echo
hero.
chamber,
Yeah,
the other
right.
side is framing this all as a desperate Trump
He's no
looking
hero.
for a way out because he's losing. Iran exposing US superpower as a Hollywood illusion.
Yeah, in
White House comms director
yeah,
Trump,
1930 is
Anthony
7:30
saying
p.m.
Trump's
evening.
increasingly
7:30 p.m. is
unhinged
evening
posts
time here.
digs at the Pope.
So
Christ-like images show what's
in military
happening
time, that's
inside his
19:30,
mind.
or however you guys
Sorts
tell
of
time over
tweets
there.
and that
I don't know how you guys tell
outlandishness,
time.
when it tips over into where he is now, that's where I think you're seeing the pressure come
You're
out.
killing me,
Many
Belinda.
wondering now if that pressure will finally lead to that deal.
That's all from the team here in Washington, D.C. We'll hand back now to Al Jazeera's global headquarters in Doha. Thanks for joining us.
All right, everyone. Thank you again for showing up, and I'll see you again tomorrow night. Get ready to dance, and we'll have a good time. Talk to you later. Bye.